This guy right here is Julian Kryfart Plassen, a son from a branch family of the noble Kryfart house. Back in the day, every girl in school couldn't hide their feelings for him, even though he wasn't high-born royalty. But that was then. The guy has a crazy reputation on the battlefield. Everyone knows about the talent of young Julian of the hidden eyes, a genius in both swordsmanship and magic. He's known for wiping out hundreds of demons with a smile on his face. His mana control, absolutely legendary. But here's the kicker. Julian can actually see when people are afraid or angry through a colored aura that appears around them. Despite his power, even his own family is terrified of him. They've been plotting to take him out because, as a member of the branch family who happens to be the strongest of them all, he could seize control of the main house at any second. No doubt about it. The old Julian was a straight-up villain who would have done exactly that. But what nobody knows is that the real Julian is dead. This bastard in his body right now is actually a reincarnator, believe it or not. A guy named Lee Si-hoo from the modern world was obsessed with a game where the protagonist gets killed by the traitorous villain, Julian Kryfart. Lee Si-hoo hated Julian's character, but the gods dropped him right into the villain's body to redo his steps. The catch, he's got the body, but zero combat skills. Now, to make sure nobody finds out the all-powerful Julian is actually powerless, he has to keep up the act. To pull this off, he has to be just as cruel as the original Julian. While acting as a proctor for a school exam, a student accidentally bumped into him. The Julian everyone knows would have obliterated the poor kid for that mistake. Looking around, everyone has a purple aura, the color of pure terror. Then, one of the instructors steps in, Eileen Donacia. She's the only one without a purple aura. Back in school she was a magic prodigy and even became a professor. Lee Si-hoo knows she must despise Julian since they were classmates. Suddenly a purple aura flickers around her. To convince this girl, who actually knew the real villain, that he hasn't changed, he uses the harshest, most polite insults to humiliate her. It works. Not only does the aura turn purple, but her face turns red with emotion. Truth is, Julian didn't want to be mean. He's just trying to look cool and edgy to survive. His second attempt at being cold is declaring that mistakes must be paid for with a duel to the death. He expected her to beg for her life so he could just let it slide, but she calls his bluff. She charges her aura and challenges him. If he's going to point a sword at students, he'll have to kill her first. You can see the raw emotion on her face. Julian expected resentment, but this was unpredictable. And since he's not actually strong, he's in real danger here. When she turns to tell the students to run for their lives, Julian acts according to his crazy reputation. He strikes from behind and shatters her magic barrier. It leaves her stunned. A mage is useless at close range, but something is off. That blushing face of hers isn't normal. His attack was weirdly weak. The girl was terrified, but in that moment, her repressed feelings came flooding back. Years ago, she looked up to Julian as her idol. Even without the highest noble rank, he was perfect. No girl could resist him, and neither could she. She admired him for so long because he was the total package. Beauty, class, and talent. She eventually confessed her love, but he shot her down. All that resentment he saw, it was just a broken heart. Realizing the aura of fear and hate had vanished, the protagonist moves like a ninja and lands a lethal blow. He gently pats her head and tells her the battle is over. In a duel like this, it usually ends with someone being eliminated. But Julian says something totally out of character. I would never use my blade to cut something as beautiful as Lady Eileen. All he wanted was for her to show him where the exam hall was. This totally broke the girl's brain. Why is he acting like the guy she loved back in school? And what about that crazy reputation he built after graduation? As they walk, the protagonist thinks about the phrase the girl said. She was referring to the special technique Julian used, enchanting his sword with mana. The blade would glow blue, as if he were holding the moonlight itself in his hands. The young man had used this weapon to slay countless demons, and people had nicknamed it the Moonlight Sword with a mixture of respect and fear. This sword is practically Julian's signature, so it will be a very difficult task for Lee to wield it. The fact that Eileen had already noticed a change in his fighting style was bad news. So the protagonist decides he needs to make sure the girl doesn't suspect anything. He turns to the two youths following him and asks if something is wrong. Frightened, they both reply that it's nothing and continue on their way. The three of them arrived at the training area. Opening the door with a smirk, Julian entered and apologized for being a little late, blaming it on poor Eileen. He formally introduced himself, stating that he would be conducting the admission exam today, though he was fully aware that the students had surely heard of him already. Heron's eyes scanned the crowd, finally landing on someone, the second son of the Torso family. This family was well known for its long-standing good relations with the Krypart family. Since being affiliated with the shut-eyes was a great honor. The position was highly contested. Normally, admission involved a battle between an instructor and the applicant. If Julian ended up failing the Torso family's second son during the process, the Association of Elders would use it as an opportunity to finish him. Haran believed this was where Julian's story of infamy would end. The young man continued speaking to the candidates, asking if they all wished to join the shut-eyes. A bit apprehensively, the youths answered yes. The silver-haired boy then said he saw nothing before him but a bunch of cowardly trash. He mocked their naive eyes, a sign of their easy upbringing, and their swords, which made him laugh. The association they wanted to join was the most violent place in the empire, and, as their senior, Julian would give them a demonstration of what was to come. With that, they would begin the admission exam, and the acceptance criterion would be to end the life of Julian Kreifart. Scared whispers erupted from the participants, all of them terrified by what they had just heard. Julian held his sword with confidence, even though he was sweating profusely. The young man thought that now he would be able to convince everyone there. Haran approached and reminded him that even if it was just an admission exam, he shouldn't go easy. During his fight with Eileen, the boy had little choice but to flee, but now he would have to participate in a real duel. This would make Haran and the other students realize that his strength wasn't so great after all. Furthermore, without being able to use the moonlight sword, everyone would think his fame was just a rumor, or that the whispers about him losing his memory were true. Under all this pressure, the young man froze. To make matters worse, if Julian started acting too suspiciously, a certain girl might attack him. Eileen's eyes were fixed on his every move. While gripping his sword tightly, the protagonist began to think of solutions. The best strategy was to provoke them right after they took the bait. In a mocking tone, the young man reaffirmed that the exam would only end when he was dead, or when no participants were left. But the students were scared to death and seemed unwilling to advance. Julian stood by his word, remaining firm in front of everyone. Suddenly, a trembling hand rose from the crowd. A boy, pale with fear, announced that he wanted to withdraw from the exam. Soon, several more hands went up, also asking to withdraw. Among them, the second son of the Torso family looked disappointed in those cowards. Gritting his teeth, the boy didn't want to admit defeat, but he ended up going with the majority and raised his hand as well. None of the instructors present could believe what they were seeing. All the participants were quitting. Julian put a hand to his mouth and began to laugh heartily, his fine fabric cape fluttering in the wind. With everyone running away with their tails between their legs, there would be no exam. Lee's plan had worked as expected. Julian's cruel side had helped him escape the situation. The young man was curious about how this had affected Eileen, wondering if the general fear had made her even angrier. But when he looked at the girl's face, she didn't seem irritated, and he couldn't sense any negative emotions coming from her. Julian ended up thinking his ability wasn't working. However, what had just happened reminded the young woman of what Julian Sunbei used to do in the past, when he would avoid unnecessary conflicts simply by intimidating his opponents. Sometime later at the Shut-Eye's headquarters, someone calls out to the silver-haired young man. It's Haran, who comes over to congratulate him on his actions. Julian doesn't seem very proud or happy with the praise. He places his hands on Haran's shoulders, instantly frightening the poor man. Relieved to see that his ability is actually working, Julian says it was Haran who did all the hard work. Another young man, however, interrupts their conversation. With sparkling eyes, he says Julian was amazing earlier. He introduces himself as Lazarus, the one in charge of administrative tasks for the Shut-Eyes, and says it's an honor to meet him. After everything that happened, it was clear the rumors of Julian having lost his memory were false. The exam ended without a single battle, but Julian is already getting fed up with all the chatter. Lazarus excitedly comments that the second son of the Torso family was among the participants, but that didn't stop Julian from getting tough. This information pricks Haran like a needle. Enraged, he points at Lazarus and asks what he's trying to say, and if his intention was to belittle the participant for failing the test. Knowing the relationship between the Torso and Kreifart families, it's unacceptable to say such things. In a calm voice, Julian says that either Haran or the Torso family is causing a misunderstanding, since the Shut-Eyes don't accept nobles. As an association directly affiliated with the imperial family, only commoners or fallen nobles can join. Haran then asks if Julian himself isn't a noble. Laughing sarcastically, Julian explains that he's just from a collateral branch of the family, and on top of that, is considered a lapdog of the imperial family. The boy from the Torso family agreed to participate in the exam, even knowing he wouldn't pass the second screening round. Maybe the family was trying to teach him something through the experience, or perhaps there's some scheme involved, some shady business in this admission exam. Haran's entire body begins to tremble the moment he hears this. Clenching his fists tightly, he thinks his plan might have been discovered. However, the silver-haired boy lightens the mood, saying it's probably nothing, just a misunderstanding. Haran still looks quite distressed at the possibility of being discovered, and Julian adds that if it's not just a misunderstanding, things will get ugly. Back at the castle, Julian is finally home. The maids greet him with a polite bow. The young man walks through the corridors with a smile. One of them asks if he will be having dinner, but Julian says no. Turning to the young woman, he asks her not to let anyone into his office. The woman simply agrees, showing a hint of fear as she deals with her master. Now, inside his chambers, Julian is finally alone. He leaves his sword on the table and sits down, relieved, in a comfortable chair after a tense day. He was sharp enough to notice Heron's reaction earlier, so he's almost certain there was a scheme involved in the admission exam. He was lucky not to get caught today. He wonders how long this luck will last, since the association would surely find his flaws, which could lead to his expulsion from the family. The sword on the table catches his attention. The fact that he demonstrated he doesn't know how to use the moonlight sword today worries him greatly. Being able to wield the moonlight sword means having the power to oppress others. That being the case, he decides to hold the sword again, to try and wield it and see what happens. Perhaps with a little practice he can unlock the weapon's power. A blue light bathes the sword as Julian draws it from its sheath. Upon fully freeing the blade, he observes it carefully, holding the hilt firmly as he raises it. As expected, the moonlight doesn't activate automatically. Julian's innate ability makes him an exceptional swordsman. As soon as he picks up a weapon, he can see the path the blade should take. This trait has been with him since birth, making any type of sword easy for him to handle. But unfortunately, that's not enough in this case. There are countless people in the Empire who are as good as Julian at handling swords. What makes him stand out is something else: the overwhelming disparity in skills when it comes to using aura or mana. This is what allowed him to survive, even with his pathological mindset. As he reflects on his abilities in this new body, Julian holds his weapon. Handling mana is dangerous. If the energy flows backward, vital organs can be destroyed. The mere thought of it makes him a little worried, but this is no time for nervousness. Sooner or later he will have to prove himself. If the concept of mana in this world is the same as in the game, then Lee, who has accumulated thousands of hours of experience, will surely know how to handle the situation. He needs to move the energy accumulated in his heart to the meridian, the body's mana organ. Of these 38 organs, 6 are large and important veins, including those in the head. That is where the essence of mana connects with the heart, so this area needs to be activated. Julian's red eyes open, and he feels his aura fluctuating. Proud of his achievement, he places a hand on his hip. Now he needs to channel the mana from his body elsewhere. The resistance is greater than he imagined, but his skill should be enough to complete the task. Suddenly, the sword's blade begins to shine with the true glow of moonlight, but the light fades quickly. The glow reached the blade, but it was too faint, reminiscent of a crescent moon. In any case, it was a start. The first sliver of the moon had appeared after all. Sometime later, our protagonist is in a training ground, surrounded by several dummies. Focusing, he prepares to strike. One hand holds the sheath firmly, while the other draws the blade. Like a flash of lightning, Julian dashes past the training dummy, destroying it. Splinters of wood fly through the air in the wake of his attack. Relieved, Julian realizes he has at least reached the skill level of a knight. His next task is to complete the moonlight sword, but his knowledge from the game is running out. He will need to find someone trustworthy who knows him to ask for advice. At that moment, a maid approaches, calling for her master. She informs him that the young master has a guest, which seems like the perfect opportunity for what he was thinking. Unfortunately, it's no one important, just Lazarus. The animated expression vanishes from the silver-haired boy's face. Lazarus, on the other hand, is thrilled to realize Julian remembers his name. It would be impossible for Lee to forget someone who chatters like a parrot in front of Julian, an act that could be considered either courage or stupidity. Cutting the useless conversation short, the swordsman asks what brings him here. The young man explains that he came on the commander's orders to confirm the results of the Veil Academy exam. Julian considers it useless, as the results were obvious. In any case, receiving and delivering the results is part of the procedure, no matter how unnecessary it seems. Already turning his back, Julian tells him to report that 0 people passed the exam, but on second thought, Julian has something else to say. Before Lazarus can leave, he asks him to wait. The swordsman confirms with the messenger if this news will be reported directly to the commander. Since that's the case, he asks to go and deliver the news himself. Surprised, Lazarus can't believe what he just heard. Placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, Julian says they can both go in his carriage. An expression of fear appears on the young man's face, and he asks if he did something wrong. Trying to calm him down, the silver-haired man says no. In reality, the protagonist only wanted to be kind so the young man wouldn't have to go back alone, but Julian's reputation is truly terrible. Since things turned out this way, Julian wonders if he should ask that man for advice. The commander of the Shut-Eyes must surely know the silver-haired man well. That being the case, the Crayfart family could never pull off any schemes as long as the Shut-Eyes were involved. Far away, in a beautiful castle adorned with gold, a man in uniform begins to shout, warning his commander of a problem. Stuttering, the young man says that person has come personally. Julian Crayfart Plassen himself has decided to come see him. In a calm voice, the commander merely repeats the information he just heard, his gaze mysterious, as if he were guarding unknown secrets. The palace of the Adrathan Empire is truly stunning. Our protagonist never imagined he would see it with his own eyes. The continent of Resenda, the game's main setting, is dominated by 3 great nations, the strongest of which is the Adrathan Empire, where Julian currently resides. After the demon Barbados was sealed, the devastated lands united under a powerful monarchy that grew into a major power, and the symbol of this strength is this beautiful and majestic palace. Inwardly, Lee is marveling at the wonders around him, but outwardly, Julian maintains his usual stoic expression. Lazarus, on the other hand, is terrified by the quiet chuckles the swordsman keeps letting out. However, something catches his attention as he thinks it over. Normally, the great Julian is only accessible through his servants, but now he wants to inform the commander personally, and has even brought a commoner along, which is very strange. The other citizens nearby notice the same thing. One man whispers to another that he thought the young lord was injured, but he seems perfectly fine. Everyone begins to think the rumors about his memory loss must be false. For poor Lazarus, it's a great honor to be there, but he is so nervous that he feels he could faint at any moment. With a satisfied expression, Julian remarks that the place is still quite majestic. He explains that this is the general access gate, and the captain should be somewhere beyond the second gate. This admiration, however, seems odd to Lazarus, since it should be a familiar sight for a member of the Shut-Eyes. A dark thought crosses his mind. What if this is all some kind of test? The swordsman's condescending expression seems to confirm that an incompetent trainee like him needs to be tested again. But while Lazarus is wrestling with these dark thoughts, Julian is simply admiring with his own eyes the scenery he had only ever seen on a computer screen. He finally notices the nervousness on the young man's face, and asks if he is all right. Lazarus replies that he is perfectly fine. The palace is built with so much gold that its brilliance glimmers on the horizon. As they near their destination, the poor young man asks if he passed the test. Completely confused, Julian asks what he is talking about and denies it was a test, saying there would be no point in testing him. Overjoyed, the young man interprets this to mean he is already considered a qualified member of the Shut-Eyes. He thanks Julian profusely, and then excuses himself, leaving in high spirits and humming a tune, leaving the protagonist confused by his peculiar nature. A soldier approaches and informs Julian that the captain has given him permission to enter. The time has come to meet his boss, Captain Odwin Balladeer, the sole heir to the Balladeer family. His strength and leadership led him to the rank of captain. He is the only person capable of uniting and controlling the members of the Shut-Eyes, taking orders only from the imperial family. Lee imagines how charismatic this man must be in real life, and the thought makes him a little nervous. Reaching a well-decorated door, he asks if he may enter. A voice grants him permission. Surprisingly, the person sitting in the captain's chair is nothing at all like what the protagonist had imagined. With a serene look, Odwin Balladeer welcomes Julian and asks if it's true that he's injured. Still reeling from the surprise of seeing the captain as a little girl, Julian tries to keep a straight face, but seeing how small she is leaves him even more bewildered. In Lee's memories, the captain was indeed a person of short stature, but he didn't recall her being a girl who looked like she was still in high school. Suddenly, the girl's small index finger points at Julian's face. In an irritated voice, Odwin asks if he was about to say she's small, as usual. Awkwardly, the young man says no, but realizes her reputation for being charismatic is indeed true. She then asks him to talk about his injuries. Crossing his arms behind his back, Julian feels a bit unsure of what to say. He wonders if he should be careful with his words in front of her. Knowing the game character well, Lee knows that in the worst-case scenario, she might become suspicious of his actions. Despite being arrogant, the original Julian was extremely loyal to the Shut-Eyes, so it's important to continue acting respectfully toward the captain. Bowing, the young man thanks her for her concern. He states that the injury he suffered wasn't minor, but it wasn't enough to compromise his loyalty to the Empire. An awkward silence fills the room, making Lee think he said something wrong. The captain observes him, putting a finger to her lips. Suddenly she slams her hand on the table, shattering the room's silence. She stands up and walks over to Julian, saying that something seems off. The young man shuts his eyes tightly, wishing he could escape the situation. As she asks if he's always spoken that way, bringing the hilt of her sword close to the boy's face, the young woman says he's acting like a stranger. Extremely worried, Julian can observe the negative emotion emanating from Odwin. It's the color of denial, meaning the young woman is truly suspicious of something. Confused, Lee wonders how the real Julian treated his superior until now. With a swift movement, the young man grabs the hilt of her sword, deciding that from now on, he will act defensively, like a true villain. This irritates the girl, who dislikes the idea of someone touching her weapon. She turns and says that he rarely shows up at the headquarters, and when he does, he just delivers his reports and leaves. Therefore, acting so diligently is very strange. Lee had believed that even Julian would cross the line between personal and professional with the Shut-Eyes, but it seems that was an insolent assumption on his part. The young man explains that he came in person because he was away from his duties for a while due to his injuries. Then, the protagonist decides to adopt the bold and shameless attitude the original character would have. With a sarcastic smirk, he asks if she's trying to control his decision to show up or not. The young woman replies that she heard he'd been acting strangely since he got hurt, but it seems he has recovered well. Somehow it still bothers him a little to see how direct Odwin is with Julian. She is definitely not an ordinary woman. She then moves on to the matter of the exam, and asks if there was anyone promising. Julian replies that there was no one. The captain, however, says she expected as much, since as a disciple of Hayden Reich, he wouldn't be impressed by just any talent. She also asks if there wasn't anyone who would qualify as a trainee, but the boy once again denies it. Odwin continues to read a sheet of paper and, her voice laced with irritation, asks if he really failed every single student. With a brazen smile, Julian confirms. The girl grows even more agitated and demands to know why, but the young man remains silent, just smiling. The captain then repeats her question, even angrier now, rising so abruptly that her beret falls from her head. She argues that the Shut-Eyes are short-staffed, and that even one more person would be a help. But Julian retorts that being short-staffed doesn't mean they should accept just any idiot. To Odwin, some of the talents there could have flourished with proper training, but the young man believes it would be a waste of time. In reality, however, it was all just an excuse Lee had come up with to avoid fighting the students. Impatient, the young woman tells Julian to get out of her sight. Before leaving, however, the young man says he has a proposal to make. He reaches into his coat pocket and places a white envelope on the table. Inside, laid out in an organized manner, are all the flaws he identified in the current admission exam. Confused, Odwin picks up the paper and begins to read. The document argues that the participants didn't understand what kind of place the Shut-Eyes is, and the captain agrees with this, realizing the candidates truly don't know what they are signing up for. She decides to read what the young man wrote. One of the sentences states that when a person signs up for the admission exam, the Shut-Eyes will take no responsibility for what happens. To the girl, this sounds more like a threat, the kind that candidates need to be aware of, that Julian will face them with the intent to kill. Odwin asks if her thinking is correct, but the protagonist just starts to laugh with his usual sarcastic laugh. Lee decides not to answer, as the truth is that Julian holds a very high position among the Shut-Eyes, and has probably never directly interfered with the organization's internal politics in this way. The captain concludes that this was why he didn't pass anyone. He didn't want trouble after injuring the participants. The boy confirms this, and adds that, besides, any participants who were accepted wouldn't be useful, as the agency is affiliated with the Empire. The young man refuses to forgive those who tarnish the nobility. Annoyed, Odwin comments that he always acts this way when the imperial family is involved. The captain decides she will take the letter to the council, but she makes no promises it will be approved. After their conversation, Julian asks for leave to depart, but the girl tells him to wait. Odwin informs him that she heard a message from the imperial family will be arriving at his office. Smiling, the boy looks back and thanks her, leaving the captain behind to watch him go. The young woman continues to read the letter, reflecting on the words written there. To take no responsibility for what happens in the exam means that even if someone were to die, it would not be considered a crime. This, however, doesn't change the essence of the exam, since only fallen nobles or commoners are eligible to apply in the first place. There have never been complaints about the exam, as it's very easy to sweep the grievances of the powerless under the rug. Julian probably brought this information to light because he realized the Elders Association and the Torso family were plotting something during the exam. This letter must be his response, a message showing that he already knows about their scheme, and that if something like this happens again, he won't let it slide. Perhaps this is his way of getting revenge on the Elders Association. The girl's thoughts are interrupted. A soldier asks if the captain called for him. She hands him the letter and asks him to send it to the council. Obediently, the soldier says he will. Until now, Julian was known as the royal family's lapdog, thanks to his loyalty, but it seems the beast that had always followed orders obediently has developed an ego of its own and begun to break free from its shackles. The thought makes Odwin somewhat uneasy. She knows she must keep an eye on the boy, as he could represent a great deal of danger and uncertainty. Julian arrives at his office in the Shut-Eye's headquarters. Normally, members of the organization don't have private offices, as there's no need for them to be on standby, but it's curious to think what a private room from such a large association would look like. Probably something quite extravagant and luxurious. And as expected, Julian's flashy clothes are all there, along with some sinister and creepy decorations, items that have nothing to do with work, and everything seems even more expensive and exaggerated than in his own home. As he walks through the room, he ends up stepping on some things scattered on the floor. It seems the young man is a bit of a hoarder. Someone knocks on the door, and the swordsman tells them to enter. It's Lazarus again, who has come to deliver a letter from the imperial family. With a smile on his face, the young man carefully hands over the envelope. It's probably the letter the captain mentioned would arrive. Before the boy can leave, however, Julian asks him to wait and load the carriage with those sculptures. Startled, Lazarus asks if he should take all of them, and Julian confirms. Overjoyed, the boy bites his lip as if he's about to cry. He's thrilled to have been given a task, imagining he probably won't be an intern for much longer. He immediately starts loading all the trinkets. Excited, the young man picks up a large chest, but ends up tripping on more junk left on the floor and falls with it, luckily without breaking anything. Julian doesn't get angry, just watches with a sarcastic smirk. In the boy's mind, however, this is enough to make him extremely nervous, thinking he'll be punished. To try and lighten the mood, Julian decides to make a joke, saying that the cleanup would be a bigger hassle if the boy died there. Knowing that, it's better for him to keep moving things quickly. With that matter settled, the silver-haired young man decides to read the letter while he waits. The envelope is sealed with the imperial family's crest, just like in the game. The letter begins by stating who the information is for in a different handwriting, but one that Julian can fortunately read. Basically, it says that as soon as he recovers, he can return to work, which seems like a sugar-coated way of enslaving him. Still, it's good to get some field experience to practice his sword movements. The mission is to restore a resonance stone. In the game, there are monsters called demons, and everything changed after the death of the demon god Barbados. His mortal remains, which either parasitized living beings or manifested in physical forms, became the demons of this world. They began to attack humanity, and the items used to defeat them became known as resonance stones, the great legacy of the mages who created them using mana. Since Julian is not a mage, he will probably have to protect the mage responsible for restoring the stone. Even though facing demons is risky, there's no strong reason to refuse the job. If he succeeds in the mission, all the suspicious rumors about him will be put to rest. He is curious about which mage he will be protecting, as dealing with resonant stones requires great magical skill. He's hopeful it will be someone decent. Far away, in the imperial palace of Adrathan, a girl with long brown hair stretched. It was Eileen, wondering why she still had to write reports even after becoming a professor. Perhaps it was part of a mage's life to constantly prove oneself, especially to the demanding imperial family. A hand gently tapped her on the back. It was Diana, a woman with green hair, asking what brought her to the palace. She commented that Eileen must be swamped, as she hadn't seen her around in ages, and invited her for tea. Despite loving the invitation, the mage declined, as she was busy with her thesis. Diana commented that she was still as diligent as she was in her student days. Suddenly, something caught Diana's attention, and she pointed to Julian's carriage, which had just arrived. The crest was only used by collateral members of the Kreifart family, so it was definitely him. Diana commented that she heard the young man was on the verge of death, but it seems he's already active again. With a mischievous expression, she noticed something in her friend's posture and asked if she still had feelings for him. She recalled that, back in the day, Eileen was so sweet that upon hearing a rumor that a love confession was never refused under the Academy's cherry blossom tree, she had taken Julian there. Desperate to end the conversation, the mage changed her mind and said that she suddenly found she had some free time for tea, but Diana insisted she had no reason to be embarrassed, as all the girls at school loved the young man back then. This made Eileen reflect. Thinking back, the young man used to be completely different from how he is today. He became this way after returning from the Northern Front and joining the Shut-Eyes. Diana asked if she wasn't going to greet him, but Eileen replied that having liked him in the past didn't mean she still did. Besides, she would be able to go a good while without having to look at his face. Taking out an envelope, the young woman said she wouldn't be returning to the palace for a while. Surprised, Diana observed the envelope, which seemed to be an important letter from the imperial family. Eileen had been given a mission to restore a resonance stone. Soldiers with spears readied themselves for action. One of them asked the reason for so many guards, and it seemed that even the Shut-Eyes and the Blue Knights Order would be joining. It was a special mission, one that even the famous Julian would be joining. The two talked about the false rumors that the young man had lost his memory. For the soldiers, it was hard to even imagine someone as strong as him suffering an injury. This made our protagonist satisfied that he had accepted the mission, as the bad rumors were being disproven. A few knights approached, thanking Julian for his good work. They were Perrin and Heinleich from the Blue Lion's Order. The three of them would work together to protect the mages until they reached Julian, and anything could happen on the way, even some fearsome demons might appear. One of the knights asked why Julian didn't want to ride in the carriage to their destination. That way the young man could rest and leave the mages to them. In the protagonist's judgment, it seemed the knights were trying to be kind, but it likely wasn't for his comfort. The Blue Knights are official soldiers of the Empire, and unlike the Shut-Eyes, most of them are nobles. It seemed they were trying to ensure that someone from a collateral branch wouldn't steal their spotlight. Either way, it would be more comfortable in the carriage, so the young man accepted the offer. That was easier than Heinleich had thought, but as soon as the knight mentioned he would inform them when the mage Eileen arrived, the protagonist's eyes widened. However, there was no time to get the information straight, as someone had already arrived. With a friendly smile, the mage introduced herself to everyone, quickly realizing that someone she never wanted to see was there. Sweating, Julian asks Perrin to forget the whole story about the carriage. The girl is surprised not only to see her former love there, but also that he simply turned his back on her. Julian, however, couldn't feel comfortable around Eileen, unable to see her thoughts and feelings. The soldiers misinterpreted the situation, thinking Julian had changed his mind about the carriage to assert his dominance. They even thought he had discovered their plan to seize command by sending him to the rear. It was to be expected from someone who had survived the chaos of an imperial family without any support. Still, it was extremely arrogant for someone from a collateral line to look down on the soldiers, just because he was part of the imperial family. But Julian could only think about how no one had warned him that the mage he was supposed to protect was Eileen. The girl was also quite uncomfortable with the whole situation. Since that was the case, he decided to finish the mission as quickly as possible to avoid interacting with her. He spurred his horse forward, quickening his pace, and so, they quickly arrived at Julian, a very small town. The group had been sent directly by the Empire, but strangely, no one was there to receive them. Finally, a young man carrying some supplies noticed them. He welcomed them, saying they must have had a long journey, and guided them to the resonance stone. The soldiers organized where the stones would be placed. Eileen decided to carry one of the boxes herself, as the stones were very sensitive to mana. However, the young man who had greeted them asked her to accompany him to check the stone that needed restoration. It was a large blue rock with a nasty crack at its base. Unfortunately, the mage said it was useless to try and repair it. It would have to be replaced. The barrier would disappear temporarily, but she assured them there was no reason to worry, as it wouldn't take long. Then, the girl carefully placed her hand on the stone. She knew it would be best to warn Julian that the barrier would disappear during the replacement, even though the last thing she wanted was to look at his face. She had to be professional. After all, she was a teacher. So, she approached him, only for him to turn his back on her again. She insisted, telling him it was very important, but her mind reeled, trying to understand why he was avoiding her. Whatever his reasons, he shouldn't be acting this way. They were on an important mission. Grabbing his clothes, the teacher insisted, asking why he was avoiding her. But Julian explained that he had never avoided her. She was the one who was insistently following him around, her face turning bright red. The mage almost believed him, taken in by his confident tone. Getting straight to the point, Eileen said that wasn't important right now. With a sarcastic smirk, Julian asked what could be so important to Miss Stalker, which made her furious. However, a loud noise interrupted their conversation. Demons had just invaded the city. Their attention was immediately drawn to the monster invasion, and Eileen explained that she had been trying to warn him that without the barrier, demons could appear at any moment. Screams could be heard, and a familiar silhouette approached the protagonist. It was Heinleich, appearing right in front of him, but something in Julian's gaze turned to extreme worry. Pointy, battle-dirtied horns emerged right behind Heinleich. A two-horned demon was attacking the battalion. The demon that appeared didn't have just one, but two horns. Eileen started to approach, but Julian told her not to get any closer, warning that it was too dangerous. Meanwhile, the demon continued to roar. Trembling, the girl tried to think of a plan to deal with such a powerful monster. In an incomprehensible language, the demon began to order other creatures to attack. One of them closed in on the girl, about to strike, but the protagonist lunged forward, gripping his sword tightly, and positioned himself in front of her. He told her not to let her guard down. Taking the opportunity to provoke her, he added that it was naive of her to be shaken by something so small. Julian stated that it was better for him, the swordsman, to handle this part, and that they should each stick to what they do best. Stuttering, the girl asked what each of them was supposed to do. Pointing at her, Julian said that the mage was responsible for restoring the stone, and he was responsible for protecting her at all costs. With a sarcastic tone, he asked if the teacher was so scared she had forgotten what she came here to do. Rushing toward her task, Eileen explains it will take about 7 minutes. Before moving away, she calls out Julian's name, pleading with him to try not to get hurt, as she can't use healing magic. Clutching his sword, the protagonist replies that it will be hard to get hurt. Inwardly, however, Lee knows that despite his bravado, he is terrified. He never imagined he would face a two-horned demon so soon. Running away isn't an option. There are too many people around, and rumors would spread. So, the protagonist starts to wonder what the real Julian would do. His thoughts are interrupted by the sound of armored footsteps. The Blue Lions have arrived to assist in the fight against the demon. As soon as they reach the battle site, they charge, completely focused on the monster, which looks extremely dangerous. Now Julian, the Blue Lions, and the spear soldiers are ready for battle. Cautiously, one of the soldiers plans to keep chipping away at the demon's health. Trying to make a joke, the man asks if Julian is afraid of the two-horned demon, and in truth, fear wasn't part of his character's persona. But suddenly, the soldiers' expressions change completely as they see the silver-haired young man laughing. Lee thinks that the real Julian, in a life-or-death moment, would act exactly like this. The demon doesn't wait, and begins to wind up a punch toward the protagonist, who seems to be genuinely enjoying the situation. Using his exceptional swordsman's reflexes, the young man's eyes widen as he easily dodges the enemy's blow, and manages to inflict damage in return. Impressed, Perrin realizes it was massive damage from just a single attack. As fluids from the monster's wound splash onto his face, the boy smiles maniacally and his sword begins to glow with moonlight. The young man quickens his pace and runs toward his adversary, making a swift leap to reach it. He unleashes a sword strike right at one of the demon's horns. Seeing his charge was successful, the swordsman smiles again, but the demon's large red eye is locked on him, and Julian realizes he's been careless. The demon's head strikes him squarely. Badly wounded, the protagonist feels the full impact of the blow. The pain is so great it's hard to even breathe. Julian thinks that even a worm can fight back like this. He doesn't give up and lunges toward the beast's eye, plunging his sword into the monster's skeletal body. Then, he crashes hard onto the ground, carving a hole in the soil. The soldiers are frightened, but Perrin sees an opportunity to take command. However, one of the men shouts for them to look back. The boy's silhouette is still there, standing. His sword is shining brighter than ever, emitting a shimmering blue light. One of the soldiers recognizes the glow. It's the moonlight sword, bound to its master swordsman, and this time it has been perfectly activated. Everyone on the battlefield is dumbfounded to see the much-talked-about moonlight sword. It's not even at half of its true strength, but it's already a significant disadvantage for the monster. Relentlessly, Julian approaches the demon, emanating blue energy. With his eyes locked and focused, the young man is in ecstasy, and the demon seems to feel all the excitement behind the blow. But the impact also affects our protagonist. Although the monster seems slow, its attacks are agile, but Julian can predict them thanks to his innate ability to read his opponent's movements. Focused, the young man parries every incoming attack, moving his body swiftly to avoid being hit by the monster's charges. The boy's red eyes are locked on his target. All the soldiers watching are surprised to see such skills, and Perrin finally understands that the boy's fame is not for nothing. Meanwhile, the resonance stone is almost ready. Only a few details remain before it is completely restored by the skilled mage. The girl leans her arms on the parapet and shouts to let everyone know that the barrier can now be activated. On the battlefield, some stones begin to float near the demon, distracting it. Julian seizes the opportunity to say that looking away during a battle is a very stupid thing to do. He quickly approaches the monster's head and unleashes a devastating blow with his sword. In a zigzag of light, the boy passes through the adversary's body, cutting it down in his path. This entire display of skill leaves Eileen speechless, as are the soldiers, who are completely dazzled. The demon that had once terrorized them all now falls like a lifeless puppet. The monster's fall creates a loud thud, as our protagonist turns away in a heroic pose. Finally, the harsh battle ends with Julian's victory. He could hear the crowd murmuring around him. Moved, the protagonist realizes his efforts were all worth it. Everyone is both frightened and impressed. Since Julian is, after all, a villain, it's only natural for people to feel fear upon witnessing his power. A voice calls out to the boy, who is still lost in thought. A pair of hands approaches and grabs his. One of the soldiers thanks him from the bottom of his heart for fighting. Relieved, the man says he thought they were all going to die, and a simple celebration begins among the warriors. Perrin also approaches and thanks the swordsman for his hard work, but it's noticeable that he is extremely nervous and sweating profusely. Julian places a hand on the warrior's shoulder and asks him to take care of the rest, as he isn't used to moments like this. Now, Perrin realizes that Julian is different from everyone else, standing out even among the nobles. To be so calm after facing a demon like that, it isn't human. Moving away from the crowd, The protagonist approaches a crystal-clear lake and sits down to rest for a moment. Now that the dust has settled, he realizes just how ridiculously dangerous the situation was. He relives all the emotions of despair, fear, and panic he felt while facing that monster. His hands are still trembling. In real life, things are truly much more frightening. This makes him wonder how the real Julian could go through such experiences as if they were nothing. The boy tried so hard to act like the character that he even scared himself, and he wonders if his thoughts are changing along with his body. In his mind, a question echoes: just how strong is the real Julian? The skill he had just unlocked came from the combination of Lee Si-hoo's knowledge and Julian's experience. Now, the protagonist is able to keenly perceive his enemy's weak points, and even inflict additional damage if the target is afraid. With this ability, it will be easy to erase any and all suspicion about him. The only problem is the moonlight sword, which is incomplete, a weapon made especially for the character. As he observes it, the protagonist carefully sheathes the sword. It's clear that several scratches have been made on its blade. It took a lot of mana to activate it. Neither its power nor its stability could compare to the complete sword. But upon thinking of the word stability, the young man starts to get some ideas. Smiling at his reflection, the boy gets a brilliant idea. Far in the distance, hoisted flags can be seen. Hooded men appear to be waiting for something. Suddenly, a well-dressed man opens the door to a hall with a large dining table. It is the Association of Elder Nobles. One of the hooded men asks the newcomer to sit. Trembling, Heron looks very nervous. The hooded man asks if it's true that Julian has discovered their plans, and what his response was. With a trembling voice and full of dread, Heron confirms that it is. Julian, in fact, seems to have already discovered the organization's plans. One of the nobles, without mincing words, says he already imagined Heron's uselessness would cause problems. He adds that, if it weren't for his direct ties to the family, the young man would already be done for. Another hooded lord comments that the movements of the Shut-Eyes are strange, as they have sent a proposal to the Imperial Secretary's office. Heron then reveals the new rule. The Shut-Eyes would not be held responsible for anything that happened during the admission exams, not even a death. Upon hearing this, the noble's expression darkens. Outraged, another man slams his fist on the table, stating that this would be the same as giving in to all of Julian's demands. The information causes a commotion throughout the room, with everyone erupting in outrage. Suddenly, a voice argued that this could be an opportunity. It was Lord Aiden, who clasped his hands with a sly expression. He reminded everyone that, until now, Julian had only followed the orders of the imperial family. However, if his actions began to suggest he was breaking free from those chains, and the young man started to act on his own accord, it would surely lead to a series of changes. It could be a better way to use him, compared to when they sent him to the Northern Front. Indignant, another noble asked if Aiden was suggesting they simply let the young man do as he pleased. With a smile, Aiden replied that he was. Back in his quarters, Julian rested for a while after the mission. His plants, beautiful and healthy, were clearly well tended. Seeing the room decorated to his own taste brought him a sense of peace. The plants seemed to possess a magic that could bring calm even to someone like him. Many things had happened on the last mission, but fortunately, all the rumors had been dispelled. The young man opened a large chest full of items. Inside, he saw a red stone that shone brightly in the light. Finally, Julian had found a way to complete his moonlight sword, using that beautiful scarlet gemstone. He got this idea after observing the resonance stone. In the game, all objects possess the ability to absorb mana, and the stones produced in the Empire had the highest conductivity, which was why the resonance stones worked so well. So, he would borrow this idea of imbuing mana into the object. Thus, there would be a layer between the swordsman and his sword, which would act as a channel to transport all the energy. However, as soon as he touched the stone, it shattered into several small pieces. With this, Julian realized he would need to find a suitable stone, one that was compatible with his mana flow. A knock came at his door. It was probably time for dinner. Julian asked if it was the butler and gave him permission to enter. And once again, the diligent Lazarus was there, ready to serve. The captain wanted him to visit the Imperial Secretary's office and give a report in his own words. Surprised, the young man repeated the request to make sure he had heard correctly. He immediately rose from his chair, preparing to leave, and asked his faithful aide to put the stones back in the chest. The fact that the secretary's office was summoning him was very intriguing. Before the swordsman could leave, Lazarus called out to him again. He held up the shards of the red stone and asked what to do with them. Julian told him to throw them away. Although the aide felt it was a pity to discard such beautiful little stones, he complied with the order. Julian then arrived at the Imperial Secretary's office. Unlike the Shut-Eye building, the place was quite elegant. The young man identified himself and said he was there to meet with Mr. Seton Orby. However, the attendant informed him that Mr. Orby was in a meeting and asked him to wait. Julian understood and said he would wait. The guest who had arrived before him probably had an even higher status than his own. He reached the waiting room, a place he had never been able to see inside the game, which was also quite elegant. Something in the corner of the room caught his attention. A sword. It was strange to see a weapon left there so casually. Furthermore, the sword didn't match the room. It was quite plain, but it looked like it belonged to a very skilled swordsman. The phrase, "A strong body harbors a strong mind," was inscribed on the sheath, and the protagonist had a feeling he had seen it somewhere before. A stern voice ordered the young man to take his hands off the sword at once, but the voice was so familiar that he didn't even need to turn around to know who it belonged to. It was the noble Lady Ronbell, a member of the Empire's prestigious family of knights, and one of Haydenreich's disciples. The very one whose life, during the game, was cut short by the hands of none other than the infamous Julian Krypart Plassen. The memory of the lifeless girl flashed through the protagonist's mind, and now he was seeing her in person. As Hayden's disciple, she could be a key figure in his quest to escape the game. Rinna Ronbell is a faithful disciple of Hayden Reich, skilled enough to one day surpass Julian. She was also admired for her unwavering obedience to Hayden. For this reason, a special wedding dress was made for the girl, and she was consistently ranked as one of the most popular characters among players. But now, the protagonist is in Julian's body, and all he can sense from her is pure, unadulterated hatred. When asked what he was doing with her sword, the protagonist says he was just looking, trying to provoke her. He remarks that he didn't expect her to leave her master's sword unattended. The girl retorts that it's because Hayden dislikes being armed. Since the knight mentioned her master, the young man seizes the opportunity to ask if he's the one in the meeting room. Suspiciously, the girl asks what business it is of his. Julian replies that he was just curious, since the man was also his teacher a long time ago. With hands trembling with hatred, Rinna grips her sword, and furious asks how he dares to say such a thing. Since the provocation was intentional, Julian decides to try and smooth things over, but the door opens, interrupting their conversation. A man asks Miss Rin to go to the office. Turning her back quickly, the girl says a cold goodbye, adding that she hopes to never see him again. However, the messenger says that Julian has also been summoned to the meeting room, making the atmosphere tense. Trying to lighten the mood, the protagonist acts nonchalant, saying they should get along since they were both students of the same teacher. However, still cold, the girl replies that they are not anymore, and that he should never dare to mention her master's name again. Julian is about to meet his favorite character from the game, while in the body of the man who betrayed him, a thought that makes him both excited and nervous. Soon the two young people arrive at the Imperial Secretary's office, and are received by a gentleman who starts the conversation by congratulating the protagonist for defeating a great two-horned demon. Annoyed, Rinna cuts off the conversation and asks where her teacher is. It turns out that Reich left as soon as he assigned a mission to the girl, on which Julian will accompany her. Shocked, the blonde asks why she would need to go on a mission with that traitor. Her master asked for someone from the Empire to accompany her because it is a very dangerous mission, and it just so happened that Julian was already there. The mission is to investigate the capital's slums. The young man asks why they need to deal with such filthy places. According to some sources, demons are appearing in these areas, and the residents do not want the imperial family directly involved. Therefore, it is a perfect job for the two of them, who are affiliated with the imperial family, but are not fully part of it. The slums house people from different countries who were denied entry into the empire, and since they dislike the imperial family, sending the Shut-Eyes, who are neutral members, is a good idea. If Miss Rin performs better than Julian, it will be easy for her to succeed the title of Holy Swordsman. The mission may not be ideal for the protagonist, but as a lapdog of the royal family, it is necessary for him to accept. Annoyed, the girl refuses, something the young man wishes he had the privilege to do. But the man reminds her that her master personally chose this mission for her, and going against her teacher's wishes is a very complicated matter. After an awkward silence, the young woman says she understands. While observing her in a state of nervousness, the protagonist reflects that, as a knight who holds the title of Hayden's disciple, she will most likely do her best to keep him under control during the mission. The young man currently does not have enough power to resist. If only he had access to a stone that matched his mana. The stone on Rini's neck immediately catches his attention. He can't hold back his curiosity and asks what kind of jewel it is. The young woman replies that it is a moonstone. The stone seems to shimmer with the energy the protagonist was so desperately seeking. As he brings his hand closer to the necklace, Julian can feel the magnetism of its aura. Angry, the blonde pulls away, and he says he was just looking. Even if only for a few seconds, the young man could feel the stone's resonance with his mana. Something so necessary was now so close. Determined, the protagonist goes to a jewelry store to acquire one like Ren's, and asks if the seller has any moonstones in stock. However, these stones are extremely rare, and with the exception of collectors, no store has them. Julian's expression darkens with frustration, making the seller extremely nervous. The man says they can try to procure one for him. Relieved, the young man says he really needs one, and the poor merchant says he will search the entire country. But when the day of the mission arrives, the stones have not been found, and the protagonist is very worried that Rinna will notice his sword is incomplete. The girl takes the lead, but the young man warns her that it's the wrong way. The young woman glares at him. Since the slums are surrounded by illegally constructed buildings, it's not safe to follow maps or signs to get there. Holding a map, the blonde says she'd rather follow it than listen to the young man, and he can't help but see her point. However, the eastern slums are a nightmare for newcomers. Even the game's developers admitted it's a difficult territory to navigate. Determined, the girl says she won't fall for his schemes, as she is convinced that the traitor might be planning to sabotage the current disciple of the Holy Swordsman. With a firm voice, the young woman adds that she is different from Julian. She will become the next Holy Swordsman without a doubt. Nervously, the young man thinks his companion is mistaken, as this mission will be anything but easy. The two adventurers argue over which path to take. Suspicious, Rinna asks if Julian has ever been to the slums before. Lee Si-hoo certainly had, but admitting that would be risky for his disguise. If he has no real experience, she asks, how does he know the correct way? Smiling, the young man says it must be his intuition. The blonde then suggests they go their separate ways, but Julian reminds her that the Imperial Order is for them to move together. Unless, of course, the knight believes Hayden Reich is more important than the Empire. Furious, the girl warns him to never mention her teacher's name again, if he has any shame at all. She is so enraged that her hands are trembling. Deep down, the warrior knows Julian is stronger than her, as she's heard many people comparing the two. In her troubled mind, a phrase echoes. If it were him, the objective would already be accomplished. But her conviction that she is the successor to the Holy Swordmaster remains firm. Snapping out of her reverie, the girl notices something that worries her. The signs showing the way are extremely confusing. Already aware of this, Julian smiles and asks what the problem is. It's easy to see that the blonde is completely lost. The map doesn't match the names on the signs and seems to be wrong, so the adventurers end up going in circles, always stopping at the same spot. A man with a scar on his face calls out to them, asking if they're lost. Baden, however, has no intention of helping for free, and asks the girl to buy him a drink in return. Knowing the fame of her surname, the suspicious man thinks he's hit the jackpot. When Julian tries to introduce himself, Baden doesn't seem the least bit interested. Stopping to think, the name isn't unfamiliar to the protagonist, but since nothing came to mind immediately, he must not be a very important character. Before guiding the adventurers, Baden asks the bar owner to get them each a drink. The bartender asks where the two are from while wiping a glass, seemingly adjusting the price after hearing the answer. The attendant informs them that it's 30 nars per drink. Smiling, the man warns that things in the slums are quite expensive indeed, but as she pulls money from her clothes, the girl says that's not it at all. In fact, she found the drinks to be quite cheap. The guy's eyes sparkle at the sight of so many gold coins, as expected from the daughter of a wealthy family. Dragging the bar owner to a corner, the scoundrel asks him to make their drinks special, as he plans to rob them while they're drunk. And as he prepares the drinks, the bartender does exactly as requested. Soon, 3 large mugs of drink are served. The blonde picks up her mug and brings it to her lips, but before she can take a sip, Julian stops her. Calmly, he begins to observe the liquid inside the container. In a menacing voice, he asks if the man put something in their drinks. Desperate, Baden starts asking what he means by that. Then, just to be sure, the protagonist holds the mug out to the man and tells him to try it first, or perhaps he'd prefer the swordsman to force him to. Annoyed, Rinne orders her mission partner to stop making a scene, but as soon as the girl says his name, Baden seems to recognize it. Worried, the bar owner asks how the man managed to bring the imperial family's lapdog to his establishment. Sweating nervously, Baden tries to say it's fine, as he always has his lackeys hanging around the pub, and they are the best and meanest looking thugs in the slums, who seem to have already noticed the commotion. Baden himself starts reaching for something in his coat. It's the hilt of a sword, showing that even he is willing to fight. Losing his patience, Julian announces that their time is up, already preparing for a possible fight. As soon as the protagonist moves, the lackeys stand up and charge, but with swift movements, Julian manages to grab one by the neck. Another approaches from behind, preparing a weapon to strike him, but his attack is thwarted by the protagonist's evasive maneuver. The henchmen are taken down one by one, not understanding what is happening. Rinna also draws her sword. Now all the lackeys are frightened and have lost the courage to attack. Standing firm, the boy says he doesn't know what these guys are after, but it would be best not to cause any more trouble in the slums. The tip of Julian's blade is pointed directly at the thief's neck. From the way the people around them begin to act, It's clear they are all his henchmen. Since that's the case, the protagonist demands that Baden order them to back off, or else he'll have to take drastic measures, and someone there will meet the same fate as the beer mug. The man begins to tremble inwardly, revealing his purple aura to the protagonist. His henchmen start to make a move, but in desperation, Baden yells for them to retreat quickly. Fearing the worst, the two lackeys leave the establishment. Now, if the young man is willing to answer a few questions, Julian guarantees he'll help him surrender safely. It's better for the thief to surrender than to lose his life. But the choice is Mr. Baden's. The protagonist asks again what the man would rather do, die or surrender. With few choices left, Baden decides to surrender. To Julian, the man's help had been suspicious from the start, but the fact that he was a member of a criminal organization surprised him. At least, the two of them managed to get some valuable information. Rena, on the other hand, is downcast, feeling guilty for putting them in this situation. Julian notices that the girl seems to have lost some of her confidence. The young woman asks how the swordsman was able to notice that the thief had put something in their drinks. Building a little suspense, the young man asks if she really wants to know. The blonde replies that she'd rather learn a lesson, even if it comes from someone she despises, which is a noble attitude on her part. Of course, it would be better if there wasn't all this hatred directed at him. Julian then explains that thanks to his mana detection ability, he was able to sense the murderous intent coming from both the drink and the place itself. Knowing the risk, he used his mana even before entering the bar to detect the hostility coming from the other's energy. It's a principle similar to the radar that bats use. This technique is normally used by mages, but since he possesses a large amount of mana, detection becomes easy. Still unsatisfied, the blonde has another question. Instead of asking about the demon's location, he chose to ask Baden what life was like in the slums. Rene questions him, as she thought their mission was to deal with the demons, not the residents. But Julian confirms that's exactly it, and asks if the young woman is familiar with demonization. The blonde replies that it's a phenomenon that began when the remnants of Barbados parasitized all living creatures, except for humans, and these remnants manifested as demons. However, since the slums have resonance stones, it's impossible for these creatures to infiltrate. This means that the only possible hosts are the humans themselves. Just like in the game, Julian already knows that demonic possession is likely occurring in the area. For Rena, however, it's impossible to believe this story. The young man continues, stating that 3 families bought fever medicine last week, one of the first symptoms of demonization. The girl, however, is still very doubtful. The day ends and the sun sets. Now the young woman seems more cheerful, and says there's only one house left for them to check. She comments that since there has been no sign of demonization so far, this could be great news. With this positive mood, they are close to completing their mission. Julian knocks on the door, asking if anyone is home. A sinister, red-eyed man opens it. Although not a concrete symptom of demonization, his defensive aura indicates the man is hiding something. The smell is also familiar, similar to what Julian sensed during the Resonance Stone mission, the bitter stench of demonic vital fluids. Maintaining his composure, the young man introduces himself, but upon learning the young man is part of the Shut-Eyes, the man's expression changes. Shouting, he starts telling them to leave. However, Julian holds the door, preventing him from closing it. With a shove, he throws the old man inside and forces his way in. Surprised, the warrior says he should have at least offered an explanation for what was happening, but in Julian's eyes his mission partner is too naive, and all that naivety could one day be her ruin. Once inside the residence, the young woman remains nervous, as they don't have authorization to break into houses. The protagonist, however, is calm, knowing the Imperial Court wants results, no matter how they are obtained. According to the information they have, the man lives alone with his son. Even so, the table is set for 3 people. Nervously, the old man replies that he has a guest today. To inspect the food, Julian stirs the soup with a spoon and notices it's strangely thick. The young man realizes the old man put a sleeping draft in the soup to offer his guest, and that this guest is likely the demon locked behind the door. Impressed by her partner's perceptiveness, the blonde is left speechless. In a desperate move, the old man runs toward the door, shouting for his son to flee as he grabs a key and tries to open the padlock. The door opens, and the man keeps repeating for his son to run quickly. Suddenly, the shadow of an immense maw appears and snaps up the old man, who screams in despair. Behind the locked door, there was indeed a gigantic demon. Rena draws her weapon, wondering if a human truly became that monster. If so, it must be hunted down immediately. The girl's strike goes straight for the terrible demon's eyes, but the monster is faster and swats her away. Luckily, it's nothing serious, and the warrior manages to recover. Julian recognizes that sword as the one Rini used before her awakening. Perhaps that's why she asked about mana earlier. This mission might be too dangerous for her. So the young man steps in front of her, which irritates the blonde, who says she doesn't need help. As he draws his sword, the boy says this is his job. Besides, he can't let the holy swordsman's dear student get hurt. The problem is that the moonlight sword isn't perfect yet, but it's better to try using it than to raise suspicion. The demon approaches quickly, and our protagonist knows he must destroy it. He then decides to activate his newest ability, which allows him to predict movements and detect weaknesses. Immediately the demon is struck by a beam of light, and the swordsman dashes between its legs in an agile move. Deeply focused, Julian realizes he has created an opening for Rinna to attack the demon, and the enemy is caught off guard by the charge. The girl charges full force toward her adversary, brandishing her sword. However, the demon is alert and manages to defend against the attacks. Julian asks her to keep the enemy distracted, but the blonde is barely managing to handle the adversary, so it will be a difficult task. It's then that the warrior spots an object that might serve her purpose. She grabs a container filled with some pasty food and throws it in the demon's face, blinding it. Reeling from the trick, the monster clutched its eyes. Now its face was bruised and dirty, leaving it disoriented. Seizing the opportunity, Rinna began to focus, determined to pour a massive amount of energy into her next attack. However, while she was focused, the demon's gigantic hand struck out, gravely injuring the warrior. The monster had managed to locate her by scent while her guard was down. As a result, the blonde warrior failed to distract it as her partner had requested. She was so ashamed, she felt she could never face her master again. Meanwhile, the demon opened its massive maw, baring its sharp teeth. Then, a shout called out for Miss Rin. It was Julian. She asked what he was doing, but the swordsman simply smiled and told her she had done a good job. His red eyes glowed as the young man prepared to use his skill. Still disoriented, the demon shook its head, but began to lift the warrior with its giant arm. In that moment, the silver-haired boy spotted a perfect opening, using the breach to plunge his sword deep into the monster's body. The demon's grip on Rinna began to weaken, until its hand finally released her. As she broke free, the blonde warrior seized the chance to strike the enemy as well. The two warriors left their adversary doubly wounded. Still holding his sword firmly, Julian held his pose until the monster's heavy body finally crashed to the ground. Impressed, Rinna realized her colleague had managed to strike the demon down without even using his moonlight sword. Seeing her reaction, the young man gave a sly grin, saying that the moonlight sword wasn't necessary this time. Julian felt a thrill of satisfaction, pleased with how natural his lines sounded. Sometime later, the two arrived at the Imperial Palace. Despite all the hardships, the protagonist had completed another mission, and he was relieved, believing his companion suspected nothing. Suddenly, the blonde warrior broke the silence, saying Julian should take all the credit for the mission. In her view, she had done absolutely nothing to contribute. He tried to argue that wasn't the case, though he had to agree she hadn't really done much against the demon. With a sharp voice, Rinna looked at him and said, "I don't like you." Smiling, Julian replied, "Now you're not even trying to hide it anymore." Her master once told her that with great power comes great responsibility. She admitted that the way he defeated the demon was admirable, but seeing how he used his powers against civilians made it obvious why their master had abandoned him: his complete lack of restraint. Hearing her sincere words, the protagonist smiled and commented that restraints are weapons used by cowards. Irritated, the blonde warrior asked if he was calling her master a coward. The boy deflected, saying he wasn't an eloquent person. Since he wasn't a noble, he never had to live a life full of restrictions. He stated that she needed to know that people like him exist in the world too. Irritated, the warrior asks what the young man is getting at, but to end the conversation, the protagonist simply thanks her for all the credits. A little frustrated, Rinna thinks to herself that she can't figure this guy out. After all, restraint is something all knights must possess, not just the nobles. Suddenly the girl runs into her uncle Ergen, who offers her a ride. She accepts, and the two of them head off together. Her uncle asks if the mission was exhausting and if she was able to complete it. He then asks about the young man she was with. The man recognizes Julian and mentions rumors that the Elders Association is on high alert because of the young man's recent actions. Surprised that anyone would treat the association that way. "Just what you'd expect from someone from a branch family," he remarks. Her uncle's remark makes the girl reflect on what Julian had said earlier, about never having lived a life that required restraint. Ergen adds that he'd prefer his niece to keep her distance from the boy, calling him a dangerous person who probably isn't even that strong. But before the man can finish his sentence, Rinna cuts him off, saying that's not true. She has no evidence regarding his other traits, but the swordsman is definitely very strong. As frustrating as it is to admit, he's incredibly strong. The grand castle with its golden details comes into view again. Julian approaches Odwin. With a grim expression, the captain asks, "What the hell did you do?" With a sarcastic smirk, the young man asks what she means. The first thing that comes to his mind is that the bartender or the slum residents reported him for violence or property damage. This likely happened because the protagonist was so focused on acting like Julian that he didn't consider the consequences of his actions, but the captain just continues to stare at him with a blank expression. She then comments that Baden, a criminal wanted by the Shut-Eyes, turned himself in. When asked why, the man began to tremble and mention Julian's name, even though Julian's actual mission was to investigate the demons that had appeared in the area. Sarcastically, the young man suggests the criminal might have had a sudden crisis of conscience over all the crimes he'd committed. Odwin doesn't seem convinced. She says she knows he had something to do with it, but tells him to just take his mission payment and go. Delighted, the young man takes the paper with his payment details. A few days ago, all his savings had run out, and he remembered getting an email from the jeweler warning him that there weren't enough funds to pay for the moonlight stone. Expecting to receive enough to pay for the stone, the young man looks at the paper, only to get a shock. The total payment for the mission was 11,000 nars. The local currency, the NIR, was worth about the same as $1, so it was an incredibly high payment. Even with Miss Wren giving him all her credits, it was still an impressive amount. Odwin notices the young man's expression, and explains that the amount is lower because he's been absent from missions for so long, which only leaves the protagonist even more stunned. Looking at the document more closely, the young man notices some deductions for registration and maintenance fees, likely related to Julian's artworks. The payslip is filled with installment payments. After all the deductions, only 900 nars remained. Apparently, Julian is really terrible with finances. This is a big problem as the protagonist needs a lot of money to buy his moonlight stone. So, the boy decides to ask the captain if there are any more missions available. Impressed, Odwin asks if he's in need of money. She says that unfortunately, nothing new has come up and advises him to stop spending money on frivolous things. The young man wouldn't be so irritated if he had made those purchases of his own free will. However, Odwin reminds him that he could buy an entire castle if he sold his artwork. The suggestion sounds like a revelation. It could be a great emergency plan to raise funds. All he has to do is sell all the artwork. Shocked, the captain is left speechless, finding the whole situation very strange. A short time later, two hooded figures appear. They are members of the Elders Association, and they comment on how Julian defeated a demon, even without using his moonlight sword. Aiden, one of the members, gives a malicious smile. The conversation is cut short when he says he needs to take care of some things with his subordinates and walks to a nearby door. Aiden then asks his servant if Julian really killed a demon without using his famous sword. The man calmly replies that he did. Breaking out in a cold sweat, the servant comments that it's truly monstrous. He then asks if he should proceed with his superior's orders. With a wicked look in his eyes, Aiden orders him to proceed, as he intends to make that monster his property. Far away, at the Ed Cosmos Art Gallery, a few people are observing the place. Despite having come to the gallery, our protagonist wonders if he'll be able to sell all these trinkets. A short man greets him and introduces himself as Pierso, the appraiser. He says that even though it's a sudden request coming from Sir Julian of the Shut-Eyes, he is happy to oblige. The painting to be appraised is covered by a cloth which Julian begins to pull back to reveal it. It's a beautiful work of art depicting a wheat field. The appraiser's eyes sparkle, seeming interested in the painting. With a magnifying glass, the man begins to examine the technique, which looks very similar to that of Corsius Vincent. The protagonist moves closer upon hearing what he said. However, Pierso declares that the artwork is a fake. The young man's red eyes widen. In his thoughts, he wonders if Julian had such poor taste in art. He starts to think he should have brought something else, but he had assumed this piece would be valuable since it was hanging on the entrance wall. But Pierso continues saying that he has never seen a forgery of such high quality, and for that reason, he would like to buy it, offering 1,000 nars even though it isn't real. Although it's a good profit, it won't be enough to buy the stones. The appraiser says he will go get the contract, and that Julian is free to look around the gallery in the meantime. Just as he steps away, a voice asks if he's sure he's going to close the deal. It's Eileen. She says she's almost certain that the artwork is genuine. Surprised to find her there, Julian asks what makes her think the piece is real. Eileen explains that she came to see one of her cousin's works on display, but as she passed by the painting, she noticed something. She claims that there is no painter in the Empire who can use oil paint with that level of mastery. Suspicious, Julian looks back at the artwork. Eileen adds that the signature in the bottom corner is, without a doubt, legitimate. The protagonist cranes his neck to get a closer look, and Pierso, the appraiser, feigns surprise, asking how he could have missed something like that. Julian's patience runs out. His eyes begin to glow with hatred as he asks if the man tried to deceive him. Seeing the young man's fury, a purple aura emanates from Pierso, a sign of his intense fear. Before the situation escalates, Eileen grabs Julian's hand, asking him to stop and not do anything foolish. She argues that appraisers make mistakes too, as it's only human and natural. Surprised at himself for nearly attacking Perso, and aware of the eyes on them, Julian calms down and apologizes. However, with a still angry expression, he asks if the price of the artwork will change now. The poor appraiser's eyes widen. Bowing deeply, the man begs for forgiveness, explaining that if the artwork is genuine, the gallery couldn't possibly afford it, given its inestimable value. Julian lets out a mocking laugh and places a hand on Perso's shoulder, saying that this is indeed a problem, and that he doesn't know what to do with the painting now. As the appraiser cries, Eileen offers to help. She says she knows someone who will buy any piece made by Corsius, which seems to reassure Julian. However, she asks for something in return, setting two conditions. The first is that the appraiser receive no punishment, something Julian hadn't even considered. The second, she says while blushing, is that he help her with something. Since he isn't on any mission at the moment, Julian agrees, and the two seal the deal with a handshake. Curtly, Eileen tells him not to get the wrong idea, explaining that she isn't doing this to be nice, but to repay the favor for him saving her in Julin. In a dark corridor, a terrified soldier walks with a lantern, trying to light the way. His legs tremble in fear as a noise echoes through the place. Suddenly several eyes appear in the gloom, scaring him to death. This is the story Eileen tells Julian as they walk through the halls of the Veil Academy. She explains that a soldier was attacked during his patrol, but the professors dismissed the case. However, other people have been hearing strange noises at night, and more guards have been attacked. Confused, Julian asks what else it could be besides a ghost. Eileen believes it's a demon. Although the academy is heavily protected against such creatures, she suspects some managed to infiltrate while the resonance stone was inactive. As they talk, a man with black hair approaches. It's Hardy Godfrey, who interrupts them by asking if Eileen decided to seek outside help. He greets Julian, ignoring the young woman. Eileen feels disrespected, but Hardy justifies himself by saying she brought a stranger to handle the academy's internal affairs. She retorts that she wanted to ensure someone competent in dealing with demons was called. Hardy taunts her, asking if, as a member of a collateral bloodline, she shouldn't be trying harder. The young woman shoots back, saying he was the one who barely passed his thesis review and should focus on writing another one. Irritated, the man says that people from collateral bloodlines like her should know their place, and the argument heats up. Tired of the argument, Julian decides to intervene. He steps forward and draws his sword, leaving Eileen surprised, unsure if he was offended by the comments about bloodlines or if he was trying to defend her. Without any explanation, the swordsman strikes. Nervous, Eileen and Hardy shut their eyes tightly. Suddenly, a small stone falls on Hardy's head. Julian had cut a hole in the ceiling, from which a strange red light emanated. A demon was hidden within the corridor's walls. Quick-witted, the protagonist readies himself and lands a few blows on the enemy, but a shrill scream interrupts the battle. Hardy is frantic, screaming that there's a demon on his back. When he looks, he's met with the sight of small red balls with frightening faces. Sarcastically, Julian comments that demons don't care whether someone is from a collateral bloodline or not. He adds that if Hardy truly wants to be saved, he should beg a man from a collateral bloodline to protect him now. With a simple strike, the protagonist destroys the demon threatening Hardy. Immediately after, Eileen spots another threat and warns Julian that something is coming from above. High above, all the small demons begin to merge into a large cloud, shifting form until they become a single demonic mass. The creature grows, its shadow consuming more and more of the space. Hardy trembles in fear, while the girl is stunned by the enemy's size. The small spheres had become a true giant monster. Julian realizes this is likely their true form, a bunch of weaklings who band together to fight. Sporting a wicked grin, the swordsman says he finds this quite amusing. The demon looks like a four-eyed rat with sharp teeth, and opening its disgusting mouth it charges at the warriors. The monster tries to strike Julian, but the young man dodges with agility. The blue light emanating from his sword grazes past the beast's eyes, which tries another attack, again without success. Now it's Julian's turn to attack, swiping his sword across the enemy's face. He inflicts several wounds, causing the monster to shrink in size, as the smaller demons that compose it fall away. Realizing this, the young man devises a plan of attack and comes face to face with his adversary. Without mercy, he attacks with his sword, graceful and swift. To protect herself from the flying debris, Eileen forms a barrier with her magic. Soon, all the fragments that formed the monster's body begin to break loose, while the protagonist sheathes his sword, proud. Meanwhile, the mage is already dealing with the damage, using a golden gem to cast a mending spell and fix the walls. Looking at the swordsman, she asks how he knew where the demons were. Julian remembers seeing a strange color behind Hardy while using his ability to see emotions, but decides it's better not to reveal this to her. Smiling, the girl says she always thought Julian looked down on people from collateral bloodlines, but it seems he's one of them too. The young man seems confused by the statement and asks when that happened. Eileen reminds him of when he called her a halfling of the donations. She explains that the fact he's defending people of a collateral bloodline reminds her of the Julian she knew in her student years. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks that the phrase, said only to sound tough, ended up truly affecting the young woman. The mage comments that no one treats him badly because they're afraid of him, but for her, facing prejudice for being from a collateral bloodline is a daily occurrence. Julian replies that, collateral bloodline or not, the blood that runs in everyone's veins is still red, and admits that what he said earlier was wrong. The sentence makes Eileen's face turn extremely red. Even though it was an indirect way, it sounded like an apology. So the girl decides to thank him. The protagonist doesn't understand why, and the mage plays it off saying it's for him doing the hard work in the battle. That makes more sense to the swordsman. By this point the wall is almost fixed, and after a little more time the job is done. Now that Julian has dealt with the demons, the young woman will take him to meet the person who will buy the paintings as promised. Julian is now in a luxurious room, full of floating magic books. An excited man says he never imagined he would see that work of art in person. The work is a posthumous piece by the painter Corsius. The person admiring the work is named Alram Chorny, the vice director of the Veal Academy. The man seems to have a sharp eye for paintings, as he is amazed by something that looks so ordinary to Julian. Alram continues to break down every detail of the painting, feeling like a part of it, which impresses Julian with his vivid imagination. The vice director comments that the reason the painting conveys an air of loneliness is because the painter wanted to express the suffering of his younger brother. This brother gave him great financial support, and in a letter, the painter wrote that the work contained all his feelings of deep suffering and loneliness. While drinking his tea, Julian says he understands. Using his ability to observe the color of emotions, he sees a very strong orange coming from the man. It's the color of denial. This shows not only how involved the vice director is in the situation, but also that he is seriously suspecting the protagonist. Worried, Julian wondered if there was something wrong with the painting, but that seemed impossible, especially given how Eileen and the vice director himself had reacted. The painting was definitely authentic. So what could be making Alram so suspicious? Breaking out in a cold sweat, the young man began to feel apprehensive. The awkward silence was broken by Alram, who called out to the protagonist. He asked if Julian truly knew the painting, saying it seemed he had only come looking for some quick cash. Alram said he was willing to buy the piece, but that he'd prefer to negotiate with someone who understood its true value. Hearing this, the young man realized he might not get a good price. Julian decided to take a risk and used the information he had, revealing that he knew Corsius had died shortly after finishing that piece. The reason the painting was so significant, he explained, was because it was directly related to the artist's death. Upon hearing this, the man began to laugh. However, he confirmed the information and, apologizing, admitted that Julian seemed to be quite well versed in the arts. Now, the two of them could finally discuss the price. Holding up 4 fingers, the man offered 400,000 nars. It was a good sum, but the young man decided to try and bargain for a bit more. He argued that since it was a painting only recognized after the artist's death, it should be valued even more highly. Without hesitation, Alram raised the offer to 500,000 nars, believing it to be more than a sufficient amount. The negotiation had jumped to an impressive sum, leaving the young man speechless. Since the nars currency had a value similar to the dollar, the painting was worth the equivalent of 500 million won. The man called for the boy's attention, who was still lost in thought. Smiling, Julian said that the vice director had truly recognized the work's value, and that they had a deal. The previous art gallery had warned him they wouldn't have the money to cover such an offer, and they were right. Julian's eye for art was truly sharp. A while later, someone knocked on the vice director's office door. It was Eileen, asking if he had called for her. The man was admiring his newest acquisition and asked the girl to sit down. He began to talk about the incident in the hallways, and the mage said she had managed to resolve the situation. It seemed the man's worries had been for naught. As he poured her a cup of tea, he asked if she had gotten into any trouble. Remembering Hardy, the young woman decided not to mention the incident and said it was nothing important. Even so, the vice director apologized. He then requested that their following conversation remain just between them, revealing that he believed the Aurora Society was behind what had happened. Incredulous, the mage asked why they would attack the academy. Alram wasn't sure, but he stated there was clear evidence. They had likely taken advantage of the moment the resonance stone stopped working. He added that it was best to hide this from the students for now, to avoid causing a panic. Apprehensive, the young woman gripped her teacup tighter. The Aurora Society is a demon-worshipping group that emerged recently, and the idea of them wanting to attack the academy intrigued her. However, The man assured her that he had reinforced security and would do his best to protect the students. He also mentioned that last time she had Julian's help. Upon hearing the young man's name, the woman's eyes widened as she remembered the two had a meeting to discuss the sale of the artwork. Eileen commented that she was going to thank the boy for his help, but it seemed he had already left. The vice director confirmed that the swordsman had left in a great hurry after receiving the money, and that he'd heard he intended to buy several moonlight stones. This information left the mage in shock. She ran out, leaving the man alone, musing about how busy everyone was today. Arriving at the jewelry store, the shopkeeper bowed, apologizing. Annoyed, the young woman said he had promised he had enough, but the attendant explained that a Mr. Julian had ended up buying more than expected. To make matters worse, it would take longer than usual for the stones to be back in stock. Desperate, Eileen said she needed them for her research thesis and immediately burst into tears, not knowing what to do. Meanwhile, our protagonist was completely satisfied. He had gone to the Twilight Flame Forge and was now talking to a blacksmith, asking the man to craft a sword with those jewels. A sword that looked as if it had been bathed in moonlight. The irritated man starts to argue that it's not a sword, but a decorative piece of art, and his pride would never allow him to forge such a thing. Julian, however, insists the weapon is meant for practical use. Slamming his fist on the table, the blacksmith bellows that it's a luxury item and that the young man dared to bring a design that can't even be called a weapon. He states that if Julian's intention was to create luxury items, he came to the wrong place, as this forge only makes weapons for soldiers, like Sir Reich. Calmly, Julian explains to Ruger Orland that he intends to engrave mana meridians onto the sword. Ruger, however, retorts that this is foolish, as no one could possibly fight with a sword made of gemstones. As Julian ponders, a young woman approaches and apologizes. She explains that the forge marks its name on every weapon they produce, and if the sword were to break easily, the smithy's reputation would be destroyed along with it. Julian expresses his regret, as he wanted his weapon to be made in the same place as Hayden Reich's. Nevertheless, he extends his hand and says he understands the situation, but guarantees he will ensure the weapon does not break easily. Ruger points a finger at the young man, questioning if he truly believes that's possible. Confidently, Julian replies that he does and challenges the blacksmith to test his skills if he doesn't believe him. He then takes a heavy bag, places it on the table, and asks them to make the sword first, stating he is willing to pay more than it's worth. The condition is clear. If the weapon breaks during the test, Julian will not ask for the money or the stones back. The blacksmith agrees, warning that if the sword breaks, the entire deal will be considered null and forgotten. A few days later, Julian returns to the smithy and sees his new sword. The best blacksmiths had worked day and night on the weapon. The attendant, still skeptical, asks if he is sure that it can truly be used as a weapon. As soon as Julian touches his new weapon, the perfect sword technique skill activates, and he feels ready for the test. On the day of the trial, under a blue sky and a bright sun, many curious people gather to watch. The young woman from the smithy asks if Julian would like her to send them away, but he says it's fine. Ruger approaches, calling out to the swordsman. He reveals a piece of armor specially prepared for the test. Not a generic piece, but a 1 centimeter thick block of steel. The challenge is for the young man to try and cut it. Laughing, Julian realizes they have prepared well. After all, there's no fun in a weak opponent. The blacksmith watches, admitting to himself that the young man lives up to the rumors. However, he doubts that the moonlight sword can withstand such an impact. Upon wielding the weapon, Julian feels something different, as if a path of mana were forming through the sword. He is impressed by this peculiar sensation. With an agile movement, he unleashes a powerful strike against the armor, leaving all the onlookers shocked. The sword's blade is intact, without a single scratch. Seeing the result, the attendant is also impressed. He is channeling the overflowing mana, binding it to the sword, and maintaining its continuous rotation. This is what the true moonlight sword looks like, and without much effort, the armor so painstakingly crafted by the blacksmiths was reduced to pieces. With a confident expression, Julian turns to the blacksmiths and asks what they will do now. The blue energy emanating from the sword is so intense it illuminates the entire area. As a result, Julian's skill, the incomplete sword, evolves into the moonlight sword. Proud of unlocking a new skill, the young man smiles. A vast amount of mana was channeled into the weapon, yet there wasn't a single scratch on its blade. The glow it emitted was both imposing and powerful. Finally, the protagonist had succeeded in his quest to complete the sword. Embarrassed, Ruger approaches and admits he underestimated the young man. Meanwhile, Julian sheathes the sword, saying with a smile that a demonstration is often worth more than 1,000 words. Ruger, however, warns him to remember that if the sword breaks, the forge's reputation will be ruined. Julian then promises to use his new weapon weapon wisely. From a distance, Reich approaches the remains of the armor used in the test. Analyzing the fragments, he notes that the cuts were extremely clean. With an apprehensive look, he wonders what Julian is truly up to. Rina, who is by his side, asks about the protagonist. The master replies that he can feel the boy's aura on the fragment, and that it's impressive to observe the sword path of someone whose aura is so perfectly honed for slicing. Reich regrets not having witnessed the moment the armor was cut. Noticing Rina's expression, he asks if Julian bothers her in any way. Since the two went on a mission together recently, he wants to know how the swordsman fared. Looking a bit disappointed, the girl replies that her mission partner was, without a doubt, very strong. But Reich presses on, wanting details and asking if she noticed anything strange. Not quite understanding the question, she repeats it. Her master then asks directly if there's any possibility that Julian is affiliated with the Dawn Society. Meanwhile, our protagonist is happy and proud of his great feat. The sword shines brighter than ever, now possessing incredible power. Inwardly, Lee Si-hoo feels that, day by day, he is becoming more and more like Julian. He must strive not to forget his true goal, to return to his original world. He can't live in the body of a game character forever, but returning to his world will be a difficult task. For that to happen, the world he is in must end. In other words, the game needs to reach its conclusion, with Hayden preventing the resurrection of the demon god. He also needs to stop the original Julian from killing the game's protagonist. The current point in the story is likely when the Dawn Society appears, a heretical group that will do anything to resurrect Barbados. This makes them sworn enemies of Hayden Reich and Rin Aranbel, especially for the girl whose father was murdered by the society. The protagonist had hoped to ally with Hayden's faction, but that won't be an easy task. He wonders if he should join the Dawn Society, just as the original Julian did, to gather information, but he still has no idea how to join them. Suddenly, his keen instinct skill alerts him that something is wrong. Unsure if it's just his imagination or if the skill truly activated, the young man stays on guard. He decides to call out to whoever is there, stating that their mana has been detected and they should stop hiding. Someone then emerges from the shadows. Julian begins to laugh as soon as he recognizes the person. It's a woman. The young man asks if they haven't met before. The mysterious woman has green hair and pink eyes, and there is a man behind her. Julian remembers the girl. She was the mage skilled in dark magic, the bishop of the Dawn Society, Eleanor de Michel. He also has an idea of who the man with her is. They were the sworn enemies of Hayden Reich. Laughing, the woman realizes the boy was able to see through her disguise, revealing her true identity. She says that was to be expected of Julian. The boy in turn says he has a vague idea of why they are there. Smiling, the woman replies that if that's the case, it makes things easier, and that it's time for the boy to give his answer. But in reality, the protagonist had no idea why they were there. He was just bluffing. To get around the situation, Julian says he still needs to think a little, but the mage states that won't be possible. After all, it was he who contacted them first to join the Dawn Society. The protagonist is surprised to see that things had already reached this level, and thinks that cleaning up Julian's mess has become a routine lately. However, the boy knows it doesn't matter which route he chooses, as Julian will have to be defeated by Hayden in any of them. Eventually, he would join the Dawn Society after seeking the power of demons. But that didn't have to happen immediately, so the boy tells the two that there shouldn't be a time limit for the decision. The mage agrees, but warns that they might interpret it the wrong way, as if it were part of the swordsman's plan to destroy the Dawn Society, since he is known as the Imperial family's lapdog. Julian realizes the woman is suspicious of him, and knows that joining the society now would be complicated. If the Imperial court found out, it would be his end, and a shortcut to the worst possible ending. Especially if Hayden discovered his association with the Dawn Society, there would be a clash, and one of them would end up dying in the fight, which would mean the protagonist could never leave this game. Our boy starts racking his brain, thinking of how to get out of the situation. Eleanor warns him that he already knows too much, and that it would be a delicate situation if he backed out now. The hooded man adds that he wouldn't let him get away with it so easily. The hooded person was a Monsignor, a combat unit of the society much stronger than the knights. As he removes his hood, the individual reveals his true identity. He reveals himself as Palcor, the Iron Fists, and threatens to destroy Julian if the boy doesn't make up his mind. Showing a scar, the man says he can still feel the pain from the mark the swordsman made on his face. The protagonist thinks that this is another one of Julian's victims he'll have to deal with, something that has been happening frequently, but to stay in character the boy apologizes, as he doesn't remember the weaklings he's faced. This makes the Iron Fists extremely angry, and our protagonist reflects that maybe he should stop playing the part of Julian so well. In an incredibly fast move, his opponent disappears and reappears behind the swordsman, saying he wants to see how long the boy will keep up that attitude. At that exact moment, the skill exceptional swordsman activates, and Julian manages to block Pelkor's punch with his sword. Accidentally, the boy had used his old iron sword instead of the moonlight sword. It was definitely out of habit, but for now, the protagonist knows he must hold him off for as long as possible. The two continue to fight and Julian defends against all the attacks. Soon, he also begins to strike at his opponent, who dodges the sword swings. The young man realizes the situation is getting dangerous and decides he needs some time. However, his enemy isn't willing to give him a break and rushes at Julian with all his speed, preparing a powerful punch aimed at the protagonist. The blow lands squarely, sending him flying from the impact. The swordsman feels the force of the blow, almost losing consciousness. Laughing, Pelkor asks how the boy feels losing to a weakling. While on the ground, the protagonist starts to grab his special weapon. He is angry, wondering why he has to go through this. Tired of having to clean up messes he didn't make, the Iron Fist is impressed to see the boy is still moving. The boy's emotional intensity reaches its peak, and just like that, his unique skill, Open Eyes, activates immediately. While holding his sword, the protagonist emanates a powerful scarlet aura. The enemies realize that something has changed in the atmosphere around Julian, and notice that the blade seems to be the source of such a threat, leading Pelkor to decide he needs to destroy it. But before the man could get his bearings, the swordsman closes in and unleashes a strike, catching him by surprise with such speed. Pelkor soon realizes his arm has been severely wounded. Julian remains cold, a wicked smile on his face. Enraged, Iron Fists charges forward to attack his opponent. Despite his injured arm, he throws a punch that whistles dangerously past the protagonist's face, but Julian still manages to maneuver, striking his enemy with the sword before the blow can land. Pelkor's screams echo, gritting his teeth. The warrior orders Julian to back off and prepares another strike, but the swordsman moves with such speed that he seems to be everywhere at once. In addition to dodging the lunges, he launches a counterattack, striking Iron Fists squarely in the stomach. Julian's power was truly impressive. To his wounded victim, he was a true monster. The swordsman's red eyes gleamed with confidence. The sensation of cutting flesh, watching the wound split open, and seeing the terror on his enemy's face felt good to Julian. After all, his Open Eyes ability only peaked when his emotions were running high. Suffering from his injuries, Pelkor casts his pride aside and begs his opponent to stop. However, Julian's ability has the side effect of making him extremely aggressive. He doesn't want to stop and continues to wound his enemy until he is satisfied. After finishing the job, the protagonist comments that the nickname Iron Fists seems useless now. With one hand, the merciless swordsman grabs the young man's hair. He pleads for his life, but finds no mercy. Suddenly, soft hands touch Julian's neck. Eleanor asks if that isn't enough. As the girl draws near, the power in his eyes begins to wane until it fades completely. Pelkor breathes with difficulty, but his life has been spared. Coming back to his senses, Julian is shocked by what he's done. It's common for the ability to change one's personality, but in him, the aggressive nature becomes extreme. Aware of the danger, he tries to lighten the mood by saying that Pelkor started it. Eleanor points her wand and agrees, but the protagonist points out that she didn't act even though she knew everything. While using magic to heal the injured young man, the mage admits she let the swordsman beat up her partner, and that watching the battle improved her opinion of Julian. Using her Mark of Beauty ability, the seductive young woman suggests they work together, reminding him that he has nothing to lose. The protagonist places a hand on the mage's shoulder and agrees, but says he'd prefer to think it over. As Julian walks past Pelkor, the young man trembles in fear. Displeased, Eleanor realizes her seduction doesn't work on the swordsman. Turning to Iron Fists, she asks what he thought, and if he noticed anything different. The young man admits that Julian is stronger than they imagined. The girl says she knows the rumors about his memory loss were a lie, but asks him to keep it a secret from the other bishops, as she wants to use this information for her own benefit. Blushing from his partner's ability, Pelkor agrees without arguing. As expected, her magic is only ineffective on Julian. Back in his quarters, the protagonist seems very irritated. He is pensive, knowing he escaped danger thanks to his ability, but he is fully aware that he can't rely on something so unstable. Besides, as he had anticipated, the Dawn Society is not an easy opponent. Confused, the young man doesn't know what to do. Hayden will kill him if he joins the society, preventing his return to his original world, but if he exposes the group, he will surely be killed by one of its members. With his eyes closed, Julian racks his brain for a solution. After analyzing everything, he concludes that the best path might be to join the Dawn Society after all. That way, he can gather as much information as possible to prevent the resurrection of the Demon King, the only way to return to his world. At the Genmel Monastery, headquarters of the Church of the Sun God, the one with the most followers on the continent of Rosenda, Julian walks through the main hall. The people frequenting the place become apprehensive upon seeing a known atheist walking around, and everyone watches him with disdain. One of the faithful even believes the young man is there to purge someone. An apprehensive priest approaches and asks what brings the young man to the church. Calmly, the protagonist replies that he is there to see the supreme abbot. The answer makes the cleric even more nervous, as he didn't know they were expecting visitors. At that moment, a nun approaches them, saying she will guide him and asks him to follow her. Apparently, she was sent by the person Julian wishes to see. As Julian tries to decipher the nun's feelings, she comments that he arrived earlier than expected. Undoing her disguise, Eleanor reveals herself, saying she thought he wouldn't even come. Impressed to have seen a disguise spell undone right in front of him, Julian greets her and comments that it's impressive the Dawn Society has hidden its headquarters inside this gigantic monastery. The two arrive at a large door. With a serious look, Eleanor warns that the Archbishop is waiting and that he must be very respectful. Playfully, Julian says he'll think about it, but he notices the mage is much more cautious than the last time they met. He concludes that her caution is due to the fact that the society's leader is behind the door. As soon as the two enter the room, everyone begins to murmur. The man sitting on the throne asks if he is indeed Julian. The masked man, despite being the Archbishop, wears a smile that doesn't inspire much respect. This was to be expected of Tenelron, a common farmer who was chosen by a sacred relic to lead the Dawn Society. Eleanor reminds the protagonist that he is in the Archbishop's presence and must therefore kneel. The stubborn boy, however, asks why he should do that. Dumbfounded, Eleanor asks if he doesn't wish to join them, explaining that he must prove his loyalty to do so. However, the swordsman isn't there to place his hopes in some noble faith, but rather to establish a cooperative relationship. Julian knows he would never turn to faith, so it's necessary for him to act this brazenly. Confident, the protagonist states he is certain that everyone there is interested in his status and influence, just as he needs the help of the god they serve. The faithful are shocked by the boy's arrogance, but Tenelron tells everyone to be quiet. He states that to establish a cooperative relationship, all this pomp is unnecessary, and orders everyone except Eleanor and Julian to leave. Tense, the subordinates obey, but they don't seem very confident. Turning to Julian, the Archbishop says the boy truly lives up to his arrogant reputation. Suddenly he approaches, claps his hands on Julian's shoulders, and says he likes that, asking him to follow, as he has something he wants to show him. On the way, Tenelron explains that only bishops and higher-ranking members have ever accessed this place, as it is where the sacred relic is kept. The Archbishop explains that he doesn't want to simply let him go. If the young man were to leave now, it would mean they would become enemies, but having someone like Julian as an ally is quite an interesting prospect. Therefore, in addition to forming a cooperative relationship, Julian will be promoted to bishop and will be able to use the full power of the Dawn Society. Eleanor is shocked by the proposal, but her boss justifies it by saying he is only giving the young man the treatment he deserves, and that she should never question his decision. Ashamed, the young woman simply lowers her head. The Archbishop then asks if Julian is satisfied, and the protagonist confirms, thanking him. Tenelron says that since he went to the trouble of coming all this way, he will show him something interesting. In a large hall, a mysterious chalice is filled with an overflowing red liquid. Julian recognizes the object as the sacred relic, the famous artifact that chose a simple farmer to be the leader of the Dawn Society. It is an item capable of awakening the latent power of Barbados and giving it a physical form. The Archbishop raises his hand toward the chalice, drawing out some of the liquid and transforming it into a kind of horn, showing it to Julian. Using the relic, Tenelron is able to create a demon's horn, the source of the monster's power. Julian had never witnessed the creation of a horn before, but knowing what the artifact was capable of, his thoughts began to wander, so much so that Tenelron had to get his attention. The swordsman then says that he has come to exactly the right place, as this horn is what he was missing to complete his objectives. With a suspicious smile, Tenelron says that if that's the case, the young man can have the horn he just created. Suspicious, Julian takes the object, noting that the Archbishop gave away such a powerful artifact far too easily. Several demons must be sacrificed to create a horn like this, and despite requiring many resources, the object offers absurd power. Tenelron is eager to see how powerful this artifact will be in the protagonist's hands, imagining the young man might even be able to surpass the holy swordsman. However, the boy is aware of the amount of power this could bring him, especially since humanoid demons are created using these horns. Instead of borrowing a demon's power, the user ends up becoming one, and Julian doesn't like to think about that possibility. Still apprehensive, Eleanor approaches the archbishop and calls out to him. Speaking softly, the mage says it's a bit too soon to gift the young man the horn. She explains that the boy hasn't fully committed to joining the society, and since the horn is the source of the entire organization's power, the other members won't be pleased. Despite them thinking they were speaking quietly, Julian overhears their conversation. He decides to intervene and says he'll return the gift for now, as that wasn't the reason he decided to visit them after all. The archbishop says the young man is indeed more considerate than he imagined. He explains that it will take a little more time to convince Eleanor, and in the meantime asks Julian for a favor. The stones needed to craft the horns can only be obtained from the hearts of demons with at least 3 horns. So Tenelron asks the boy to bring him more stones. Going around looking for such creatures could raise suspicion from the imperial court, but the archbishop assures him they will take care of it. A few days later, at a large train station, a locomotive waits on the tracks. Julian is confused. The archbishop accepted him as a member of the society, and even gave him the rank of a bishop. As soon as he joined, the young man was ordered to hunt a 3-horned demon, and furthermore, he suspects the society has spies in the imperial court. They are too large and powerful to be called an organization. They're more like an entire country. Harand is sitting across from Julian and comments that it's a blessing to have public transport connecting different cities. The two are heading to a place called Bernardin, where the Ascension Festival of the Sun God Church is held. Harand will be attending as a representative of the Krypart family. Trying to make small talk, he suggests that Julian participate in the festivities after he finishes his mission. Julian knows he should agree for now and says he'll try to go if he has time, but he notices that the young man is still very afraid of him. The train finally arrives in Bernardin, and the two boys say their goodbyes. However, before they part ways, Harand warns Julian not to provoke Margrave Oronil. This man was very close to the Highlands family, which Julian had obliterated. Annoyed, Julian realizes he has one more thing to worry about, thanks to the whims of his body's previous owner, but he needs to focus on his main mission, which is to defeat demons. Sometime later, a red-haired man glares at the boy with hatred, and orders him to postpone his mission. Sweating, Julian asks what the man means by that. The redhead explains that they are currently restricting entry to the Piran Forest to members of the Sun God Church only, so they can prepare for the festival. The swordsman warns that the 3-horned demon is in the forest, and that the festival could be ruined, but the man says that if the monster hasn't appeared by now, there's no problem. In a threatening tone, Julian asks if the man will go against the orders of the imperial court. The redhead replies that this is precisely why he's asking the young man to postpone the mission. The festival is the city's main pride, and it's unacceptable to ruin the celebration for a demon that isn't even active yet. Therefore, the man says that if the festival were to be ruined because of an eradication mission, Julian would have to take responsibility. Since the festival will be held in a week, he suggests the boy should enjoy it first. With a mocking gaze, Julian simply stares at the man. Suddenly, a child's voice calls out for her father. An adorable little girl appears at the door. It's Tarina, and she's looking for Oronil. Curious, the girl approaches and asks who the handsome man is. Desperate, Oronil tells the little girl to stay away from Julian and come to him immediately. Julian is shocked to realize the man actually thought he would attack a small child. Upon checking the color of Oronil's feelings, everything turns purple with fear. To end the conversation, Julian says they will continue another day and walks away, leaving the father and daughter in peace in the room. Running a hand through his hair, the young man takes a deep breath. He meets 2 other young men in the hallway, who ask how the conversation went. Julian tells them that Oronil is very stubborn, and that it was impossible to prevent the mission from being postponed. One of the men asks if they should call back the members of the Shut-Eyes who are in the forest, but the swordsman tells them to leave them there. He is certain the festival won't happen as they are planning. Tense, the 2 men ask what the protagonist means by that. Julian explains that this city, Bernardin, is where most players encounter their first 3-horned demon. A creature like that isn't just any monster. The festival could end in utter chaos. The more horns a demon has, the greater its strength. Along with its unique abilities, the creature is also given a proper name. The 3-horned beast, Hamelin, is a parasite that transforms its territory into a labyrinth. A poisonous swamp is created as soon as one enters its domain, and even if someone manages to escape the trap, the creature launches a psychological attack, making it nearly impossible to defeat. The protagonist sips his coffee while he waits. He is sure that Hamelin has already begun its attack, and that soon, Sir Oronil will come seeking his help. For a while, the young man simply enjoys the peace of the moment. Suddenly, a boy bursts into the room, saying the commander summons him to his mansion immediately. With a bow, he apologizes for the interruption, but Julian doesn't mind. He already knew this would happen. Trembling, the man awaits the warrior's arrival. Promptly, our main character presents himself to the city's leader. In desperation, he explains that his daughter, Teresa, hasn't woken up since the previous night. Not even the doctors can figure out why, and it's been happening to other children in the city, he says, trying to hide his concern. Julian realizes the demon's attack has already begun. The commander points out that it's not normal for a child to suddenly fall into a coma. Without a doubt, this is the work of a demon, Orinal shouts, desperate. The young man confirms the commander's theory, adding that it's because of the beast Hamelin in the Piran forest. The creature releases its spores onto living beings, turning them into its servants. It doesn't affect adults, but it's fatal to children, causing them to lose consciousness. The warrior explains, warning that it might already be too late for his daughter. Completely desperate, the leader grabs the soldier. He says he no longer cares about the festival. The only thing that matters is defeating this creature. Julian asks if he truly wants to save his daughter, and begging, the commander says he'll do anything. Anything? Our protagonist asks calmly. Even if it means you have to do something bad for the city of Bernardin? Sir Orinal swallows hard, trembling. With no other choice, he grabs the young man before him. Then, the commander kneels and begs, I'll take responsibility for whatever happens. I understand, the protagonist says, smiling, with a smile on his face. Our young man says that in that case, he will go ahead and defeat the beast Hamelin. Several soldiers pour buckets of fuel throughout the forest. One of them, however, questions if it's really necessary to destroy such a beautiful place. Julian explains that he'd be a fool not to take every possible precaution against this threat. Are you really planning to burn all of this? The soldier asks, incredulous. I am. We're not going to fight Hamelin in its labyrinth, we're going to destroy it, the warrior says, remembering this was the easiest way to win in the game. The aide asks if this won't make Sir Orinal angry, but the hero replies that he agreed to put the citizens' lives before the festival. With a smile, he encourages the men to get started. Light it up, Julian says as he walks away. The creature awakens as the flames spread around it. A massive roar of fury can be heard as Hamelin emerges from the blaze. Everyone shudders at the demon's cry. Our protagonist tells everyone to stay behind him, promptly announcing that he will handle the situation alone. The men exclaim in confusion, questioning how he'll deal with it without help. I need all of you to stay back, Julian states again. You'd only get in my way, the warrior says as he draws his sword. Julian advances toward the fight, walking through the flames toward the creature. He laughs at the uncomfortable heat from the blaze, preparing himself as he comes face to face with Hamelin, the three-horned beast. In a fury, the monster readies its claws and unleashes an attack that shatters the ground all around it. With elegance, Julian imbues his lunar sword with concentrated mana, making it glow. The blade fills the area with an aura of power and energy. The warrior agilely runs toward the danger. The creature freezes, surprised that it can't use its full strength. Laughing with disdain, Julian boasts that the fire has weakened the enemy. The demon glares at him, and Julian declares that now, it will be defeated. After a pause, the beast unleashes brilliant flames around it. Unable to move, the protagonist freezes. Confused, dizzy, he covers his nose. Julian had forgotten about the creature's pollen. Hamelin's pollen could induce hypnosis, nausea, and mental confusion in anyone who breathed it in. The demon seizes the opportunity to recover its posture. The warrior, however, laughs as he readies himself. Did you really expect that to work? He shouts amidst the flames. Julian had resisted the pollen's effects. Thanks to his complex mind, the attack had no impact on him whatsoever. Hamelin screams, shaking the entire burning forest. As he prepares to deliver a powerful strike with his sword, Julian laughs, thinking he's already crazy enough without the pollen's help. He leaps and strikes with his sword, bathed in mana and energy. With a swift, spinning motion in the air, the young man bathes the entire forest in a blue light. A massive explosion is seen from outside the clearing. Split in two, the demon lies on the ground. The warrior turns to check if the creature is still alive. The soldiers rush toward the battle, concerned for the hero. He assures them he is fine as he sheathes his sword, standing still over the beast's destroyed body. From a distance, Sir Orinal keeps a fixed, worried gaze on the window, staring out at the burning forest. Thank you for cooperating with the mission, says Julian. I am certain the Imperial Court will respect your brave decisions. Without showing any remorse, the protagonist asks if his daughter has woken up yet. Yes, she is recovering, the commander replies. Julian calmly takes out a necklace and says it is a gift for the child. The father, in shock, stares at the necklace made from Hamelin's remains. The warrior explains that since his daughter was the first to react to the pollen, She surely possesses more mana than the other children and will become a great mage one day. Confused, the father questions the reason for such a kind gesture, since Julian dislikes him. With a smile, the protagonist replies, "The more mages we have, the better." Orenil asks what he wants in return, but the young man retorts, saying he is simply thanking him for his cooperation on the mission. The man continues to tremble with suspicion. Surely the warrior knows he had ties to the royal family the hero dethroned. The protagonist thanks him again, and leaves, leaving behind a confused and frightened leader. Still in disbelief, the commander stares at the gift. With the new artifact in hand, the leader goes to his daughter. The girl happily greets her father, and he celebrates her recovery. "Here is a gift to help you get better soon," the commander says. The man is surprised by how much the girl seems to like the necklace. He remains worried about Julian's intentions, and plans to send a letter to the elders. The association had asked him to delay Julian's mission as much as possible, but with his daughter sick there was no other choice. "I hope Highlands forgives me for putting my family's safety above revenge," the commander thinks, worried. The train leaves Bernardin Station at high speed. Inside a carriage, Julian holds a box, breathing a sigh of relief for having captured Hamelin's heart. He cautiously opens the box. The warrior feels an incredibly strong aura coming from the artifact. The spirit stone emanates an incredible power. He continues to stare at the stone, wondering what to do now. He thinks that giving it to the Dawn Society would secure their trust, but perhaps there is a better use for this magical item. An announcement is made for the train stop at Rondrian Station. The young man notices many people getting on and decides he needs to put the item in a safe place. The elegant footsteps of an approaching woman can be heard. The woman finds her seat, right next to Julian. She looks at him in shock, unable to believe who she is seeing. Julian's eyes meet Rinna's, and he is just as startled. Quickly the young man closes the box. Julian knew she couldn't see it. If Hayden found out, it would be a huge problem. After all, carrying the remains of a demon without a good reason was far too suspicious. He stealthily hid the box behind his suitcase. "It seems fate really wants us to meet, doesn't it?" he asks, laughing. The young noblewoman kept checking her seat, in disbelief at the situation. "You must be wondering what I'm doing here, right?" the young man says, and the lady nods in agreement. The warrior explains he was on a mission in Bernardin. He takes the opportunity to joke that it looked like the knight was returning from an exciting trip, pointing to a piece of clothing falling out of her suitcase. "That's none of your business, Julian," Rena shouts. He laughs, relieved. It seemed she hadn't noticed the box. The young lady calls out to him, shattering his peace. "Something feels off," the noblewoman says, her gaze threatening, hiding his nervousness. The young man asks what was wrong. She remarks on how strange and suspicious the coincidence is, asking if he's sure he isn't stalking her. With a sigh of relief, he explains that he hadn't bought the ticket himself. The Imperial Secretariat had arranged everything. "Maybe you're the one following me," the protagonist says, causing the girl to shout in outrage. Nervously, the warrior decides to move the box to a safer place. Sihu could only think that if he'd known he would run into her, he never would have taken the box out of his suitcase in the first place. "By the way, this box seems important to you, doesn't it?" Rinna says with a piercing gaze. The protagonist's composure shatters at her question. She remarks that he's been fiddling with that box for a while now. The young man then realizes he's been watched the entire time. "It's just a jewelry box," the hero says, covering with a laugh. The noblewoman looks unconvinced. "You're still obsessed with jewels, aren't you?" the young woman says in a mocking tone. "I heard you forged a new sword using nothing but jewels." "You can never have too many jewels," he replies, laughing. Suddenly a sharp jolt from the train shakes the entire cabin, knocking the box from his hands. Julian, furious, wonders why the train has stopped. A voice announces to the passengers that the journey has been interrupted due to an unexpected storm. The artifact tumbles out of the box and rolls to the girl's feet. The young man stares, all his effort to hide the item now completely wasted. The noblewoman examines the stone cautiously. Rinna remarks that the jewel looks quite dented, and that he apparently doesn't take as good care of them as he claims. She hands the item back to him. The protagonist stares at her, confused that she didn't recognize it as a spiritual jewel. The warrior thanks her and puts the item away, his hands trembling. The two chat about the tiresome journey, while Julian's heart is still pounding from the scare. The lady says she didn't enjoy his company, but the young man expresses his gratitude for having someone to talk to during the trip. An attendant greets the lady and invites her to her carriage. Quickly, the noblewoman calls out to her companion before he can leave. "What is it?" the protagonist asks, trying to hide his nervousness. Embarrassed, the girl thanks him for what happened back in the village. "I'm not thanking you as Rinna Ronbell, but as a fellow swordswoman." Julian laughs and says there's no need to thank him. After all, they're both student swordsmen. "You were expelled," she says sharply. "Don't be so cold, colleague," the warrior says, turning to leave. "We're leaving now," she tells the attendant. "Did you enjoy your time in Bernardin?" asks Odwin. "I wouldn't call it a very fun mission," the protagonist says with a laugh. "What's with all this paperwork?" he asks in a slightly ironic tone. "There's a literal mountain of it here. Looks like you were the one having fun, weren't you, Captain?" the young man says with a grim smile. "Why do you think I have so much paperwork?" she yells, furious. "Are you lazy?" Julian asks, laughing. She yells that it's his fault and demands to know why the hell he burned down the pier and forest. Jokingly, the young man says he figured desperate times called for desperate measures. "I don't even know why I asked," the captain says wearily. "Most of these documents are from the Church of the Sun." She explains that the forest was important to them, but luckily the imperial court is helping. However, Julian should know that she's the one who has to deal with the consequences of his actions. "That's precisely why I did it," the boy says, smiling. With a sigh, she pulls over the paperwork and says she has a few letters for him, some from the academy. Confused, the captain stares at a letter with an unusual seal. The letter is from the Jermel monastery, she mutters to herself, confused. Julian, irritated, couldn't believe that this was how Aurora intended to handle his mission. Odwin explained that it was understandable for them to dislike him, but sending a letter directly was an extreme measure. "What do you know about this?" the captain asks him, her gaze serious. He remains motionless as she calls him, in disbelief that the Aurora Society could make such a mistake. A soldier throws the door open, shouting Julian's name. The soldier informs him that the secretary's office wants to know what happened in Bernardin. The soldier quickly retreats, filled with fear, and apologizes for interrupting the captain. "Get out of here now and take these with you, Julian," Odwin says, handing him the letters. "I'll see you later, Captain," the protagonist says, leaving with a smile. Outside, a boy excitedly asks him if he really killed the demon by himself. Thanks to the letter from the Dawn Society, a demon was the least of Julian's worries. He dismisses the boy so he can read the letter alone and wonders what on earth it will say. As he begins to read, the young man is shocked. It was just a simple letter, with nothing special about it. As he stares intently at the message, an ink snake leaps from the paper. "The Archbishop wishes to see Bishop Julian," the creature says. Julian recognizes Eleanor's spell as soon as he sees the message. "I'm sure it's so I can deliver the demon's horn," the warrior thinks as he disperses the ink animal. However, the only people who knew when he would return were the captain and the Imperial cabinet. Julian realizes he will need to be more careful about who he trusts. In the cathedral, everyone nervously stares at the young man in the corner. The protagonist hates the unwanted attention he's drawing. A nun approaches and says, "Welcome, Julian. It's been a while." "It has been a while, Eleanor," he replies with a smile. "I was starting to feel uncomfortable. Many rumors have been spreading about what you did in Bernardin," the mage says, as her appearance transforms. She mentions the story of him defeating a three-horned demon by himself and burning down the entire pier and forest, saying she would love to hear the tale directly from him. "I'm flattered, Bishop, but," the warrior says, reaching for something in his clothes, "could you not send me this kind of letter directly? It could put me in great danger," he adds, showing her the letter with a threatening gaze. She retorts that only he could see the spell, but Julian makes it clear he doesn't want to take any risks. "In that case, how do you plan to communicate with us?" the girl asks. Julian suggests he could just visit her sometimes to speak face to face. "Visit me?" she asks, startled, worried. The girl jokingly says he wouldn't know how to find her. Eleanor stares at him, nervous. It must be a bluff. It's impossible that man knows the true identity she hides. The warrior leaves her behind and enters the church. "Bishop Julian, you're finally here. I've missed you so much," the archbishop shouts. Excited, the leader of the Aurora asks to see the demon's horn. The young man gives a malicious smile. "I couldn't bring the artifact," he says, laughing. "So it wasn't a three-horned demon?" the masked man asks, incredulous. The protagonist confirms that it was, and that the spirit stone was there. "Then, where is the stone?" the chief asks, impatient. All the members look confused at the new member of the society. Calmly, the man says he took it to the Imperial Secretary's office. "Can you repeat what you said?" Tenelron asks, confused. "Yes, Archbishop. I took the three-horned demon's artifact to the Imperial office," the young man says, smiling. Power emanates from the leader's hands. Angrily, he demands that the warrior explain himself. "Let's just say I was taking one step back to take 3 steps forward," the young man says, laughing, unconcerned by the threat. All the members shout, protesting Julian's transgression. "How foolish of you to think that," the protagonist says, looking at everyone. "If I wanted to betray you, why would I bother coming back here?" He explains that he only wanted to gather information. This is the first stone from a three-horned demon that the nobles have collected. Once they discover its power, they will go after more. "I see. That's not a bad idea," the archbishop says, more calmly. "However, do you really think that's reason enough to hand over my artifact?" the leader questions with fire in his eyes. The protagonist feels the organization's members behind him preparing to attack. Laughing, Julian plays it off, saying that obviously there's another reason behind all this. He says that rumors are spreading everywhere about the one who defeated this demon alone, the Pillar of the Blind Eye, the great successor to the Holy Sword and a hero. He continues, everyone's attention is on me, including that of some people you know very well. Aren't you curious about who will come after me? The young man asks, smiling. The members shout, saying he's making it all up. Do you really want to fight? The young man questions, drawing his sword. How interesting. Then come, Julian says, as his sword glows with latent mana. Stop, the archbishop shouts at everyone. Who are you referring to? He yells. The protagonist swiftly parries a surprise attack with his sword. He uses the opening to focus his power and strikes his attacker. The man coughs in pain as the warrior stands over his body unharmed. The young man turns to the leader and says that if he's curious, he'll tell him. Julian's master, the wielder of the Holy Sword, Hayden Reich, will come for his student. The archbishop emanates power in his fury. Sihu notices that using the Dawn Society's relationship with the Holy Sword seemed to confuse the leader. Mana floods the entire room as Tenelron shouts, the one responsible for destroying my face. He adds, that man suspects me as well. The archbishop explains that defeating the three-horned demon and still returning empty-handed would sound strange. Now I understand, the organization's leader exclaims, jumping to his feet. That bastard even suspects his own pupil. The warrior and the archbishop join forces. Their shared hatred for Hayden forges this alliance. The archbishop says he finally understands why he joined the organization. I'm glad you understand. Julian sighs, relieved. Our protagonist sits restlessly at his desk. He knows he might have bought himself some time. If Sihu can use the Dawn Society and the Imperial Court to his advantage, he might make it to the end of the game alive. However, there's something he must do first. Deal with the person who has been following him. At first it didn't seem like a major threat, but Sihu feels that the more time passes, the more worrying the situation becomes. He sighs, relieved to know who this person is. Julian is interrupted when a young man enters the room and announces a letter from the cabinet. You can just put it on the table for me, the man says calmly. The boy carefully places the document down. As he was about to leave, the protagonist calls out to him. Lazarus, you seem busy these days. It's the blind eye's fault, he replies nervously. Even as a trainee, I have so much work. Julian points out that even for a recruit in training, the boy has far too much work. This was the same young man who had taken the message to the captain's office as soon as the warrior arrived from his mission. You're right, sir. I was curious about the spirit stone, the boy replies nervously. I see, the man says with a smile on his face. The protagonist points out how interesting it is that he knows about the stone, despite only being in training. The boy feigns confusion, but it's the first time Julian has mentioned the words spirit stone in front of him, and the young man didn't seem surprised at all. The only people who knew about the stone besides me were the Imperial Court and the Dawn Society. The swordsman continues. Lazarus completely loses his composure. Our hero explains that, from the very beginning, he felt something was strange. This boy, always taking on such important tasks, even as a trainee, Julian says, his tone growing increasingly menacing. He touches the boy's shoulder. That would be impossible without the influence of the Dawn Society hiding within the Imperial Court, wouldn't it, boy? The warrior questions. Smiling, the hero turns away and, in a disarming tone, tells him to relax, as he doesn't plan on hurting him. I would just like to talk to you, just that, the boy stammers. Does this mean I don't have to hide anymore? Lazarus removes a necklace from around his neck, its purple stone filling the air with mana. The young man's posture straightens, and he stares at the protagonist with a piercing gaze. Was that a mental spell? You seem different, the warrior asks. Without this enchantment, I could never disguise myself, the young man explains. If you're not going to defeat me, what do you want? Asks Lazarus. Our protagonist, in a relaxed stance, says he wants something simple. How about working for me? Our strategist asks, laughing. What are you getting at? The agent asks suspiciously. Basically, you're going to be my spy, Julian says casually. Like a double agent? The boy asks, frightened by Julian's intentions. Lazarus questions him, unable to believe he plans to betray the Dawn Society. Stop talking nonsense, the warrior says, laughing. I just want to be in control, the boy shouts, asking if Julian thinks he would sell out so easily. However, our hero would never ask for this for free. Using a threatening tone, the man says, I heard you've been donating to nursing homes regularly. The young man freezes upon hearing him state the exact amount the soldier in training donates. This seems important to you, doesn't it? The protagonist asks. Julian laughs, commenting on how sad it would be if something happened to that place. Lazarus glares at him with contempt. The warrior laughs and says he's just kidding, that he doesn't need to be taken seriously. He explains that if the agent decides to help him, Julian will provide a generous amount of money for that home. A generous amount, you say? The boy seems to consider the idea. Suddenly I feel the urge to do a good deed, the hero says, laughing. Confused, the agent continues to stare at him in silence. A few days pass after that conversation. A member of Aurora questions Lazarus. Did you bring what was requested? Yes, Bishop Aiden, he replies, handing over a letter. The official examines the paper, which reveals Hayden Reich's next destination. Meanwhile, the boy mentions a petition the elders wrote. However, the noble cuts him off quickly, saying it's not important, and that the young man must report the discovery to the archbishop immediately. The boy lowers his head and confirms. You don't look well, boy, the man says. The bishop notices the soldier seems off and asks him what happened. Lost in thought, Lazarus tries to decide how to respond. The undercover agent wonders if Aurora could protect him and Sister Turnia. Julian had promised to help her orphanage. Torn between his loyalties, the boy remains silent. Impatiently, the noble calls out to him, snapping him out of his trance. The startled boy shouts that nothing happened. The footsteps of an agile and elegant man echo. Julian is welcomed home by his staff. One of them takes his coat while their master seems lost in thought. The warrior can't get that day out of his head. I was so reckless dealing with Lazarus, Sion thinks nervously. He realizes that if the boy had been more observant, he would have seen through his bluff. The protagonist hadn't planned such a risky move, acting like Julian is clouding his judgment. The woman informs him that a message has arrived from home. Curious, the man asks her about the message. The hero's older sister, Runya Kreifard, is getting married and has invited him to the ceremony. Without hesitating, the swordsman sends word that his work won't allow him to go. The staff member nods, saying she will send the reply. Suddenly, the warrior calls out to her and says he's changed his mind. He will attend the wedding. His aide says she will prepare his attire. I'll prepare that pink glittery suit you always wear, she informs him. Why don't we try something more elegant, he says, trying to hide his discomfort. The protagonist decides to visit a formal wear shop on his own, the White Ornament House, the fanciest in the city. All the attendants are startled, intimidated by the presence of the famous swordsman. He, in turn, is taken aback by the sheer variety of clothes in the shop. Nervous, the hero wonders if he should ask for help. After all, neither Saihan nor Julian has a good sense of fashion. Could someone help me pick out some clothes? The warrior asks, his tone menacing despite his attempt to sound friendly. All the women freeze and immediately apologize. The young man finds himself alone. Meanwhile, a shop assistant greets Eileen. She has also come to the same store to try on formal wear. The mage expresses her exhaustion from her work at the campus. She laments how she nearly lost her job because some idiot bought up all the moonstone in the region. However, the imperial court has asked her to investigate a new material, the recently discovered spirit stones. Excited, the professor explains how she can now write an even more thorough thesis. The employee asks what kind of outfit she's looking for, and the mage replies that she's been invited to a wedding. Runya Kreifart's wedding, she adds. The attendant offers to show the young woman some dresses. Relieved, Eileen finally takes a breath, happy to get away from her work for a while. Amazed, the young woman wanders through the store, which has all sorts of fine fabrics. Suddenly the maiden freezes, not believing what she sees. Julian, in the same room as her. Quickly the lady hides from him. The warrior comments that he could have sworn he saw something, as he turns back to look at the suits. I don't even know why I hid, the noblewoman thinks, still in shock. Still surprised, the mage realizes that even though he's not from the main family branch, her former colleague is still part of it. The professor wonders why he's looking for decent clothes. Julian always dresses like a sausage. Disgusted, the lady stares at the protagonist's terrible fashion sense. The hero continues, certain he has found the perfect attire. The girl can only think about how that man will ruin the ceremony with such an ugly outfit. A child runs past behind her shouting, "Mommy, look at that crazy lady over there." Eileen gathers her courage and goes to speak with the man. The mage asks if he really intends to wear that. Funny seeing you here, the man says. I thought you weren't interested in clothes since you're always studying. The lady replies that in fact, she thinks he doesn't understand what these clothes are for, since he only wears tacky outfits. The young man asks what she meant, and the maiden retorts, asking if he's playing dumb. Or maybe you just hold a grudge against the Kreifart family, the professor says, and you're trying to tell them you intend to eradicate the nobles. The academic adds, the protagonist is completely lost by her comments. The meaning behind that outfit, Julian couldn't say. The mage points to the symbol on the back of the shirt, turning it to show the mark. She explains that it's the design the warrior family uses when punishing their enemies. Eileen says, laughing, that although the symbol now has only an aesthetic meaning, it would be comical to see a deserter like him wearing it. Since Sihu had never played as Julian, he had no idea about this. Tired of looking for clothes and knowing his character only likes extravagant things, Julian makes a gesture of defeat. He says he'll use his second option then, as he pulls out a shimmering outfit. Eileen looks on in disbelief at the horrible choice and asks without hesitation, if he really wants to wear that piece of junk. The young woman steps forward, stating that she won't allow such a thing. In the name of the donation family, a family of artists, she promises to help him. The young man follows her, happy to finally have some help. His outfit is chosen, and the wedding day finally arrives. The doorman takes the invitation fearfully, and still nervous, confirms his attendance, trembling. Meanwhile, the warrior elegantly walks toward the ceremony. However, Sihu feels uncomfortable. Julian is not happy to be there. The protagonist didn't want to come either, but there's a reason for it. The Cryfart family is known for possessing powerful spirit stones, and there are a few ways to obtain them in the game, with this being one of them. Julian's father keeps one of these stones, and the mere memory of him makes the young man feel sick. With elegance, he finally enters the palace. The musicians stop playing. Everyone freezes and trembles upon seeing him. The music stopping because of me. Isn't that a bit much? The boy thinks, smiling uncomfortably. Everyone stares, completely shocked that he came. A girl in a white dress runs to embrace him. Rania hugs him, surprised that her brother actually came. The bride waves her hand cheerfully, saying how long it's been since she last saw him. It's strange to see someone treat Julian with such affection. His sister greeted Eileen after reuniting with her brother. She cheerfully said she was surprised they knew each other, especially since they weren't in the same year. Julian was startled, having forgotten they were in different grades at the academy. The lady said, with a sparkle in her eyes, that she was happy he had come dressed up. Since he usually dressed like a clown, you could feel the mage's freezing glare from a mile away. The academic stared at him, expecting to receive credit for the outfit. The young man said it was a special occasion, so he had made an effort to choose a fine suit. The bride questioned Eileen's expression, who was staring at him disappointed. Renia thanked them both for coming with a big smile. A man called to her from a distance. Joshua Cryfart came walking in a hurry. The girl turned happily to thank her other brother for coming, but he abruptly grabbed her hand. While holding her, the young man shouted, asking what she thought she was doing, and reprimanded her for giving attention to members of the secondary family in such an important place. I was just happy to see them, the noblewoman said as she pulled away from him. You should greet your older brother too. Furious, the young man yelled, asking who said that was his brother. Finally, the atmosphere Julian had been expecting settled in. Joshua asked what that secondary was doing there, since he wasn't even part of the family. Laughing, the protagonist said he had simply accepted the invitation. The brother aggressively snatched the letter from his hand and tore it to pieces without a second thought. Everyone in the hall stared at the scene, frozen. The man glared at him with a threatening tone and said that, as a member of the family, he had a message for the warrior. Get out. And what if I don't want to? The swordsman retorted mockingly. Drawing his sword, the furious young man said he would show everyone what would happen. The weapon was unsheathed. I'll show you what happens to secondaries who defy me, the young man said, his defiant expression reflected on the blade. Joshua Cryfart, a member of the Cryfart family. He was the one who caused most of the problems at Veal Academy. He formed factions, bullied new students, and disrupted classes taught by teachers from lesser families. No one had the courage to confront him. His voice echoed through the hall, shouting for the imperial dog to face him. The warrior let a smile escape upon hearing the comment, wondering if it was courage or stupidity to challenge one of the best swordsmen in the kingdom like that. Julian moved faster than his brother could follow, lunging forward with force. In the blink of an eye, he was already holding Joshua's arm, who couldn't withstand the applied force. Julian continued to squeeze, saying that he had the nerve to hurt Renia, something a secondary would never do. The only sound that broke the silence in the hall was Joshua's sword clattering to the floor. The warrior approached and said that he should be ashamed of himself. Heron shouts that it's enough. Julian questions if he should just let Renia be treated that way, but Heron points to the guests watching them, reminding him that this wasn't the place for it. The younger brother seizes the chance to break free and shouts that Heron is right, asking how he could have forgotten where they were. Harand, however, tells Joshua to stop embarrassing the family. After all, he was the one who provoked them first. The young man freezes, realizing the embarrassing scene he's causing. Annoyed, Harand continues, saying he is there representing their father and that it was unbecoming of his brother to act in such a manner. Sihu reflects on what was said. That means the head of the family, their father, isn't present. In that case, getting the spirit stone would be nearly impossible. He is disappointed, thinking he came all this way for nothing. Julian apologizes for the commotion while checking if Renia is okay. She says it's no problem since he was protecting her, showing a proud smile. She tries to downplay the situation, and Julian says they should probably leave soon. Rania, confused, asks why, but her brother retorts that even he knows when it's time to leave. He pauses and turns to thank Lady Eileen. Smiling, he says the outfit she chose for him is perfect. He adds that she has a great eye for these things and is worthy of the donation family, giving a bow. An old memory comes to the lady's mind. She recalls the young man saying it was as if the stars were woven into the garment. He continued, saying it was a wonderful enchantment, one that suited a donation very well. The mage's feelings surge within her, and the professor can't help but remember their shared past. Julian takes the opportunity to leave the palace, but suddenly, a voice calls out to him from a distance. He sees Rania running after him, out of breath. She says he walks too fast and that she almost couldn't catch up to him to give him something. Still panting, she continues, "Tell me the truth, you only came to the wedding to see father, didn't you?" Then, Rania pulls out a small jewelry box and hands it to him, saying she wanted to give him this as a memento from their mother. His sister knows he fought a lot with their father over it. Julian agrees, while wondering if he was the reason their father didn't attend. Sihu is surprised to learn that Julian's mother had passed away. Rania says she took the object in secret to give it to him. She explains that their father wouldn't want to know, but letting the object rot in a storeroom would be a waste. Carefully, the young man opens the box. A brilliant spirit stone lies inside. Julian senses that it has been magically refined. No trace of demonic energy remains. Sihu, for his part, can't stop thinking about how little he knows about the character he has possessed. Affectionately, Julian thanks his sister. Rania says she was sure that returning it to him was the right choice. "It's the first time I've seen you with such a joyful expression," she says, laughing. They both laugh at the situation, as it's unusual to see the siblings getting along so well. Rania says goodbye, asking him to come back soon, and he says he will. Turning around, the protagonist leaves the palace. Sihu is still surprised, realizing that the family's spirit stone was, all along, the inheritance from Julian's mother. The hero swallows hard, feeling his throat tighten. This feeling, a tear runs down his face. The warrior really does have feelings. A carriage sped through the woods. Our protagonist was still stunned that someone as cold as Julian could be so sensitive, and wondered if it meant he had some humanity left in him. The young man couldn't hold back a laugh. Despite all the chaos of the event, he still got what he came for. Who would have thought he'd get a spirit stone that way? Sihu was still wondering what to do with such a powerful object, as giving it to Aurora or the Imperials didn't seem like the right decision. Then, the young man remembered a forgotten skill, something his character possessed that had not yet been explored. Demon King's vessel, the power to absorb relics containing remnants of the creature's power to become stronger. In other words, our warrior could absorb spirit stones. The young man laughed at how crazy it would be if he could become the Demon King himself. Still, having to act like Julian was a task the protagonist did not enjoy. The hero's journey continued peacefully through the forest. An ornate box was carefully closed. Even our boy was still afraid of keeping such a powerful item with him, and he realized that learning an enchantment to protect it would be useful. After so many confrontations and battles, the young man could finally rest for a while. The mansion remained quiet and untouched, as always. Suddenly, a chill ran down the protagonist's spine, making him jump from the sofa. He noticed that the flow of mana around him had changed drastically. The swordsman struggled to find the source of this disturbance, but quickly remembered that if he wasn't careful, the intruder could sense his mana as well. Relieved to feel no dangerous intent, our warrior continued the search for the source of the strange mana. Upon entering a room, a girl with blue hair and purple eyes could be seen drinking tea. Well, Julian," she said, setting down her cup. Eleanor laughed, commenting on how long he had taken. The girl said she got tired of waiting, so she asked the servants for some tea. "A guest should be treated well, right?" the mage asked, smiling. All our protagonist could think was how on earth that woman got there. Sihu was almost certain that the girl had used her charm to control the staff. "Bishop Eleanor, to what do I owe the pleasure of your visit?" he asked as he sat down. The girl said it was just a meeting between colleagues. Julian had a hard time hiding his indignation at the woman's attitude. "There is a reason I'm here. A matter needs to be resolved," she said. As she set down her cup, the young woman reminded him of the recent mission in the village where he defeated a demon. The young man nodded in agreement. "It was a humanoid demon, wasn't it?" his colleague questioned him. At that moment, the warrior understood that she wanted to know how much he knew about human demonization. "Exactly, Eleanor," the young man said, gesturing. Suddenly, a guy just transformed. However, Julian pointed out that the horned beasts were very different from what he had encountered. Surprised, the mage asked him to repeat what he said. His colleague explained that it looked more like a poorly made replica of a demon. demon. The girl questioned how much he understood about the subject, but our young man admitted he didn't know much. She bowed and added that this was enough dialogue for today. Sarcastically, the protagonist asked if his doubts had been answered, but she confessed they had, and that the test would no longer be necessary. Apparently you understand enough about the work of the Aurora Society, the bishop said as she turned away. So you know what you have to do. There's no need for us to attack each other. And just like that, the young woman left our hero's palace. Julian collapsed onto the floor in relief, understanding that he either had to become a loyal member of Aurora or leave it for good. The hero knew his house was no longer a safe place, and decided to do something about it soon. Are you sure you want to leave this with me? Heron questioned him, confused. His brother continued, saying he was sure Julian had come to punish Joshua for his behavior. However, our protagonist just laughed and said he didn't care about what had happened. Curious, the young man asked what was inside the box. The man screamed, completely terrified, upon hearing about his mother's inheritance. Are you insane? He asked, shouting, leaving Lady Melena's memento with me? Julian knew his brother would do nothing bad with the stone. The nobleman was the ideal person to entrust it to for safekeeping. Heron continued to hold the box, completely in shock at the responsibility he had been given. For now, it will be safer in your hands, the protagonist said. His brother remained frozen, thinking about how Julian could trust him with something so important. Their mother was extremely important to him. The man was sure that to take such an action, the warrior must be committing himself too deeply to the Empire. Julian stared at him, confused as he rambled on his own. Even after a few days, Joshua's arm was still injured. His own brother had nearly broken it during the wedding. A maiden approached calmly to change the young man's bandages, but Joshua yelled at her to walk faster. Furious, the boy remained in disbelief at the courage of a secondary son. Despite being a bastard, Julian still inherited the gray hair of the main Cryfat family line, and Joshua couldn't deal with his brother's arrogance. When attacked, he couldn't move a single muscle against that speed. Even without fighting back, he knew he had lost the battle before it even began. A drop of water splashed on the nobleman's face. The girl tried to apologize, stuttering and trembling with fear. Paralyzed, she couldn't even wipe it off. Bowing to the floor, the girl begged for mercy. The young man stood up, moving to strike her, but was interrupted mid-motion when he heard a voice. I came when I heard you call, said Alphas, the boy's personal guard and vice-captain of the Order of the Blue Lion. Joshua gestured for the girl to leave quickly, before he changed his mind. He showed his injured arm to the soldier, and yelled at the guard for letting that happen to someone from the main family. The man tried to explain that he was acting under the patriarch's orders, but the boy cut him off with a shout. Your role is to protect the main Cryfat family, his master yelled. Alphas just apologized in a low voice, while the nobleman screamed that a disastrous warrior like him would never find another job. Joshua turned, saying that even if he had been there, the guard wouldn't have had the courage to do anything. Bending down, the young man wet the towel that was on his arm and threw it in the guard's face. Panting, the boy told the man to shut up, saying that apologies from a worm like him meant nothing. Calmly, the soldier addressed the boy. His personal warrior asked if the noble wanted revenge on Julian. Desperate, Joshua asked how, and Alphas replied that there was a way as long as he didn't question the methods used. The guard explained that even the most powerful soldiers couldn't go head-to-head with the immense amount of mana his brother possessed. Julian's ability to imbue his sword with mana was every soldier's dream. The boy told him to get to the point. If the warrior can't use that advantage, he becomes weak, the soldier explained. Carefully, the soldier pulled an artifact from his armor. The man presented a broken spirit stone, explaining that this artifact didn't block the demonic influence of the stone's power. Then, the magical object was given to the boy. Joshua lost his balance from the influence the jewel exerted. Alphas explained that the artifact's function was to stop the flow of mana in humans. Angrily, the boy retorted that, in that case, he wouldn't be able to use his own mana to fight him either. Calmly, the soldier approached, laughing and saying that the boy wouldn't need mana to win, as long as he used this. Stretching out his arm, he presented a demon's horn to the noble. Meanwhile, in his palace, Julian was tending to his orchids. Spending time doing something Sihu enjoyed reinvigorated his mind. His peace, however, was shattered when Lazarus burst in, shouting that some members of the Aurora were planning an ambush for him. The warrior laughed in despair at having his moment of calm interrupted and, in his shock, ended up breaking one of his precious plants. The protagonist controlled his anger and asked the young man to revert to his old personality so they could talk. Julian laughed at the threat, saying an ambush was no danger, and confirmed it wasn't the bishops planning it. His spy suggested they take precautions, but the noble found it more amusing to wait and see what the enemies were planning. The young man, completely confused, stared at him, baffled by his decision. The protagonist did his best to remain calm and not throw the young man out the window for the intrusion. Calmly, he turned and asked if his companion liked plants. Lazarus kept looking at him confused, as the man delivered a monologue about orchids. Our boy plucked one of the plants and, laughing, showed how one of its roots was rotten. Fortunately, the damage was minimal, the warrior said. The young man struggled to understand what he was getting at. Seizing the opportunity, the agent reminded the protagonist of his duties as an academy instructor and informed him about a party the cabinet was planning to throw. Knowing that Hayden would be at the party made Julian's eyes sparkle. Surprisingly, our young man said he wanted something simple and agreed only to go to the academy to fulfill his duties. At that moment, Lazarus was shocked by the young man's decision. Will the protagonist take advantage of the guard being focused on the cabinet to deceive the Aurora? He wondered. Worried, knowing he would be at the gymnasium and aware of the ambush, he could use this opportunity to attack the Aurora. The agent thought, apprehensive about this decision. Without even realizing it, Julian had shown himself to be an excellent strategist. Disconcerted, the old man smiled while sweating profusely from nervousness. Julian's smile, in contrast, was more confident and showed tranquility. While wiping away his sweat, the man said he didn't expect the swordsman to come in person. Since the anniversary of the victory was approaching, everyone thought the young man would be very busy. A purple aura began to emanate from the old man as he fumbled with his words, until he said that the students must be eager for the lecture Julian would be giving. There will be a special lecture given by Julian. Worried, the man asked if the protagonist didn't know about it. The young man closed his eyes, concentrating. He replied that he knew, and was also looking forward to it. Inside, however, Sihu was thrilled, as he had never imagined himself giving a lecture. A while later, in the first auditorium of Veal Academy, a girl with short, light-colored hair was talking to Rena, telling her that the guest lecturer hadn't arrived yet. Relieved, Rena said that was good, because she was almost late. Exhausted, she thought that she had trained too hard, and hoped to use the lecture to get some rest. Her friend noticed her fatigue and commented on it. Rena replied that she was relieved it was just a lecture, since all they had to do was listen. The two commented that the guests were usually members of the Shut-Eyes, and speculated that today's speaker must be a commoner. Soon, it is announced at the front of the room that the guest lecturer has arrived. As soon as the students realize who is there, their expressions begin to change. Rena's friend suddenly raises her voice, exclaiming that it's someone from the Shut-Eyes. Still a bit groggy from sleep, Rena focuses her vision on the guest and realizes that the person positioning himself at the front of the room is none other than Julian. The young man introduces himself formally, saying it's a pleasure to be the day's lecturer. As soon as she recognizes him, Rena's eyes widen, with an expression as if she'd seen a ghost. Noticing the tension that had settled in the room, the protagonist asks the students not to be so nervous. He explains that he is only there to give a quick lecture as the examiner for the upcoming practical test, and that what he will teach is nothing too special. At this, all the students become extremely confused. To begin, Julian asks everyone a quick question, wanting to know the reason why they practice swordsmanship. Not a single soul seems to want to answer, although Julian thought it would be a good way to break the ice. So, he decides to ask the question directly to Miss Rene. The young woman is confused by such a strange question. She catches herself at the last moment, as she almost responded in the disrespectful way she always treated Julian. Although he is someone she can't stand, today he is a guest lecturer, so it is necessary to show respect. In a clever maneuver, the girl turns the question back on him, wanting to know his reason. Julian promptly replies that it's to gain fame and status. The answer surprises Rena, who imagined he would say something about serving the imperial family, even if it were just for appearances. With the question back on her, the girl says her goal is to train her mind and body to achieve her ideals. Although, in truth, she is doing it all for revenge. The lecturer praises her meaningful answer and explains that the reason for the question wasn't just to break the ice. He continues, saying that it doesn't matter how much he teaches them about swordsmanship, as it's nothing compared to what the students have already learned from life. Besides, it would be impossible to help them improve significantly in such a short period. Therefore, instead of talking about swords, this lecture will be about auras. Rini maintains the same expression on her face, but inwardly, she thinks that receiving lessons on this subject from Julian will be wonderful. All human beings possess aura veins and use them to enchant their body or their weapon. This aura is a good indicator of the skill difference between two people. Smiling, the lecturer asks if the students can see the color of his aura at that moment. Now it all makes sense to Rena. She understands what Julian means by the difference in skills between adversaries. The students begin to answer that his aura color is gray, but among everyone there, a voice says that it's silver. The female voice repeats the color with conviction, and moreover, adds another piece of information. The aura has another color, light cobalt. The The swordsman is using two aura colors right now. The silver aura is on the sword's sheath, while the cobalt one is concentrated in his hand. How well you can comprehend someone's aura is equivalent to how you perceive the skill difference between people. The girl had worked hard to close the skill gap between the two of them. Building the suspense, Julian says there is still one more color. This greatly surprises Rena, leaving her speechless, and the lecturer concludes that no student was able to see the third color. If your opponent is unable to detect your aura, it means the skill gap between the two of you is large. In other words, it's very likely that it will be easy to defeat them. While biting her nail, Rena realizes she has been very arrogant and still has a long way to go. As soon as the lecture ends, Julian receives praise for his speech. The students seem to have really enjoyed it, even coming from a guest lecturer. Apprehensively, the headmaster approaches and admits he was a little worried about his performance. The protagonist admits that he wasn't wrong, as no one would imagine him giving lectures. Since everything went well, the headmaster informs him that the practical exams will be his responsibility. After the headmaster leaves, Julian decides it's time for him to go too. Now that he stops to think about it, he had seen this hallway in the game before. Some memories begin to flash through his mind. Random words like Black Knight, Forgotten Hero, the Fallen Star, Hayden Reich pop into his head. Straining to understand, Julian tries to remember what Black Knight means and recalls the scene from the trailer where the Holy Swordsman is assassinated. The boy promises himself that this will not happen as long as he is in control. Meanwhile, at Julian's house, an impatient hand tapped against the back of a sofa. It was Joshua, waiting for him. As he waited, he observed the room and its artwork, noting some rather bizarre sculptures. The young man gave up trying to understand Julian's taste in art, nor could he comprehend why there were so many plants in the room. Suddenly, a boy approached, informing his young master that he had installed the barrier as requested. This barrier was capable of blocking the flow of mana and could be activated on Joshua's signal. Noticing the boy was trembling badly, Joshua asked if he was afraid of Julian, which made no sense to him. Inside the house were two knights who had hunted two horned demons, 6 private soldiers from the Criffart family, a high-ranking mage, and a barrier that blocked the flow of mana, more than enough to defeat a single person. Sweating, the boy explained that this wasn't just any person. When it came to Julian, he believed that all of this still wouldn't be enough. Joshua asked why he thought so, and the boy explained that he had been sensing strange things in the mansion. Besides, even though it was late, they hadn't run into anyone since they arrived. He suspected Julian already knew they were coming and had prepared. The silver-haired young man rose from the sofa and punched the fearful youth in the face, calling him a fool with an enraged expression. Outraged, he asked if the boy even had the nerve to bear the title of a Criffart family knight. Trembling, the young man stammered an apology, but Joshua said he didn't need to fight Julian, only to activate the barrier when told. Disgusted by the display of weakness, the young man stated that if the barrier worked correctly, Julian wouldn't be able to use his aura. With a malicious smile, he added that now that he possessed the power of the horn, Julian was no match for his skills. At that moment, 2 other soldiers reported that someone had just arrived. Joshua ordered everyone to their positions. Meanwhile, outside the mansion, someone rose from behind a bush. Hooded men lay in wait, and one of them said that Julian must be asleep. William Hylands, a member of the Dawn Society, declared he couldn't wait to kill the protagonist. The other members, resentful, began to complain that William had barely arrived and was already a bishop, on top of not respecting the society's ancient rules. Everyone gathered there was from the Dawn Society, and harbored very negative feelings toward Julian, confident that today would be the last day they would have to face him. Moreover, William was also there to avenge the Hylands family. One of the members noticed William was shaking and asked if he was nervous. Composing himself, the man admitted he had gotten carried away for a second. As he took out his wand, he told everyone to prepare to enter the mansion, and began to cast a spell right in front of the other members. He activated a large barrier, protecting them all, which would prevent Julian from hearing or sensing their presence. Apparently, all of the protagonist's staff went home before sunset, which meant the mansion should be empty. As they walked through the corridors, William used his wand to light the way, but something started to go wrong. Another member asked what was happening. The flow of mana in the area was very strange, and William felt as if someone had altered the environment. At the same time, one of Joshua's knights warned that Julian didn't seem to have come alone, as many people were entering the mansion, and they weren't just servants, but highly skilled mages. This information made Joshua believe that Julian had discovered his plan. On the other hand, William had the same thought, as he was unable to use his magic properly because of the mana barrier. Both invaders thought the same thing at the same time. They had fallen into a trap set by Julian. Terrified, one of Joshua's knights asked what they would do, but the young man could only think that he needed to teach the coward a lesson. With a confident smile, Joshua stated that he didn't care if it was a trap. Either way, Julian would be killed today. He reasoned that with the barrier, their target would be weakened. The only change to the original plan was that his knights would have to deal with Julian's companions, who were likely just outside the corridor. The other knights gripped their swords tightly, ready to attack. Joshua also positions himself at the front of his warriors, eager for a fight. Then, the boy throws the door open with a jolt, revealing the other intruders. Despite judging them to be strong, he doesn't think twice before shouting, calling them fools for working for that scum. William, however, retorts, saying he could say the same about them, and that those boys should be ashamed. One of Joshua's knights warns him that the mage is casting spells even inside the barrier, which means he must be at least third class. However, the white-haired boy retorts that he's still just a mage inside a barrier, and charges at his opponents. The knights exchange sword blows. In the midst of combat, Joshua starts to find Julian's absence strange. Suddenly, a shrill scream echoes in the distance, followed by blue lightning and a bright light. The boy leans out the window to see what's happening and sees a man, practically charred, defeated on the ground. He thinks, irritated, that even inside a barrier, someone was able to unleash all that power, while the scaredy cat did nothing. This will cost him his job. William grips his wand tightly, also in disbelief at the scene. The barrier, however, makes any movement much more difficult. Joshua observes the mage and notices that even on the verge of collapsing, he keeps fighting. He ponders that he might need to use his secret weapon soon, but knows he should save it for Julian, not for these underlings. Looking for an opening, the silver-haired boy watches his enemy. Noticing the slightest gap, he grabs a potted plant and hurls it at the mage to distract him. The pot flies quickly toward William, who struggles to move. Before the object can hit him, Joshua lunges forward, getting dangerously close to his opponent. Desperate, the mage begins to charge a spell, but he isn't fast enough. The swordsman manages to snatch the wand from his hand. With a confident smile, feeling the advantage, he kicks William, sending him backward. Injured, the man slams against the wall, feeling the pain of the blow. Now the poor mage is face to face with his enemy's blade. Joshua then points out that even third-class mages can't do much inside barriers. With his eyes gleaming with hatred, he asks how a piece of trash like him managed to get in his way and questions how much money he received from Julian, guessing an amount, while William looks extremely confused. Without waiting for an answer, the boy throws his opponent more forcefully to the ground. To defend himself, the mage grabs his enemy's boot, shouting that he wasn't hired by Julian. Joshua doesn't believe him, but the man insists, saying he's actually there to attack the protagonist. Faced with this information, the boy is speechless, trying to process what he heard. Soon, however, he says he doesn't care if it's true. The man was in his way and now he will die. Breaking out in a cold sweat, William realizes he will lose his life if nothing happens. Joshua's sword is absurdly close to his chest, but just in time something interrupts the execution. It seems the eventful night is full of surprise guests. Upon seeing who it is, the boy can't contain his surprise. It's Julian, who approaches slowly, his presence unnoticed by anyone. Worried, Joshua backs away, changing his stance. Meanwhile, the protagonist crouches down to observe the pot that was thrown at William, now reduced to small shards on the floor. Joshua grips his sword tightly, trying not to feel afraid and convincing himself that the barrier will help him face Julian. Julian runs his hand through the soil of the destroyed pot and says that it hurts him deeply, as he was really fond of that plant. Startled, the silver-haired intruder can't believe what he's seeing. The barrier is working exactly as it should, but Julian's aura remains as strong as ever. The protagonist then says that the boy truly deserves a lesson. A short while earlier, Julian arrived at his mansion. The atmosphere on the property felt strange. From the outside it looked normal, but the mana was highly unstable. Immediately one thing came to his mind, the ambush Lazarus had mentioned. It made sense, as many people harbored resentment toward the fox-eyed villain, and it was obvious some would try to take matters into their own hands. However, Julian was no longer as inept as he once was. He had honed his talents and even perfected the moonlight sword. Back in the present, the protagonist walked through the mansion's corridors. The place was a mess, with several corpses strewn about, which made him suspicious, as a fight had clearly taken place in his absence. Suddenly, the young man found something that caught his eye. A destroyed piece of art on the floor. The invaders had really broken everything. The real Julian would have been furious, but that wasn't the case for our protagonist. This sort of thing didn't stir his emotions. However, as he was thinking this, he saw a shattered plant pot on the floor. It was his favorite little plant, his longtime companion. Seeing Angelica smashed to pieces, however, did stir something within him. He knelt to look at the sad sight. Angelica was the first plant the protagonist had watered and named after becoming Julian. Gritting his teeth, the young man's body began to feel the effects of his rage. mage, and he decided with all his might that he would avenge his plant. To honor Angelica, the young man resolved to kill everyone there, readying his moonlight sword. For a moment, the protagonist came to his senses, realizing that getting so worked up over a plant was peculiar. There was a chance that being in Julian's body had begun to influence his mind. He tried to calm himself, not wanting to let his emotions take over for something so trivial, but memories of watering his beloved Angelica's soil flooded his mind. He watered her every single day, religiously. He would move her to the window where the sunlight could reach, carefully wipe her leaves before bed, and feed her special nutrients whenever she needed them. That was his Angelica. The thought of how someone had dared to cause her such suffering began to make him utterly furious. These intruders truly deserved to die. In a sarcastic tone, Julian asked what they planned to do now, since their cowardly midnight ambush had failed and they would need a new plan. With his eyes closed, the young man began to ponder. Apprehending Joshua would be simple, but the mage was the problem. Julian still didn't know what kind of magic he used, and if the two of them decided to face him at once, the situation could become more difficult. To provoke them, the protagonist said that even if they teamed up, they wouldn't be able to defeat him. He warned them that they should know he would never allow enemies who bared their fangs to go unpunished. But being a very merciful person, he would give them an opportunity. They could fight each other. Not understanding at all, the invaders were confused. Julian then added that he would let the winner live. Suspicious, Joshua believed the sadistic villain just wanted to amuse himself at their expense. Even though the invaders had managed to get inside the property, Julian still considered them small fry. Perhaps with the mage defeated and the power of the horn, the spiky-haired young man might have a chance. However, William began to tremble, clearly unwell. Suddenly the mage moved to attack Joshua by surprise. Joshua tried to convince him they should work together to defeat their common enemy, but the frightened man thought it was a ploy to be betrayed later. Determined to survive, William attacked him, ignoring the warnings that Julian might be deceiving them. The mage began to prepare his spells, but Joshua managed to dodge, dashing down the corridor and leaping to prepare a counterattack. He delivered a powerful sword strike to William's chest, hitting him squarely and wounding him gravely. The man fell to the ground, defeated and lifeless. Panting, Joshua observed his fallen adversary and commented on his stance. But now that he had defeated the mage, he would have to fight Julian, the smiling executioner, who never lets those who show him hostility survive. Blood began to trickle down the young man's face as he contemplated the possibility of his own death. Facing the protagonist now was like facing a guillotine. Gripping his sword tightly, the boy wondered how to escape this dangerous situation. It was then that he remembered the horn Alphas had given him. That item was known to grant the user the power of a demon, and if he used it, he might be able to defeat Julian, or at least escape. However, as he reached for the artifact, the boy noticed a hole in his pocket. The demonic horn was gone. Looking to the side, he saw William crawling on the ground holding the object. The defeated mage murmured that he had no other choice, that he desperately wanted to live and would do anything for it. While asking the archbishop for forgiveness, William brought the horn to his mouth. Immediately, his body began to transform, and a horn sprouted from his forehead. Watching the scene, Joshua stood stunned and motionless. The other boy, meanwhile, thought of Alphas cursing him mentally. The knight had said he would gain the power of a demon, not that he would become one. With his arms crossed, Julian asked if the horn belonged to him, and the boy explained that he got it from a knight named Alphas. The protagonist knew that Alphas was one of the Monsignors of the Dawn Society, a group that hated him. Fortunately, the horn William used didn't seem to be genuine. The transformation was similar to the demon Julian had faced before in the slums, and could be linked to the side effects Eleanor had explained, resulting in a power weaker than that of the shadows. As Julian reflected, William, now transformed into a demon, let out a sharp cry. Joshua shielded his face, worried about what would come next. The spiky-haired boy decided to get Julian's attention, and, apologizing, begged the protagonist to kill the demon in his place, arguing that as a cryfart, it was Julian's duty to protect him. The demon William began to move toward Joshua, using its monstrous foot to gain momentum and advance faster. Irrationally, it lunged forward to attack the young man, striking him with its claws. Watching the scene from the sidelines, Julian commented that Joshua would die if no one did anything. Appealing to sentiment, the swordsman started calling Julian brother, his eyes filled with tears, begging his big bro to protect him. The sudden change in attitude surprised the protagonist. The demon drew closer and closer to Joshua, but to everyone's surprise, it went right past the frightened boy. Julian deduced that the monster had changed its target, drawn by his intense killing intent. Guided by his instincts, the protagonist indeed intended to send that creature straight to the depths of hell. See who thought how foolish it was of Julian to hate demons so much, yet seek the power of such creatures. As the demon advanced, Julian prepared himself, gripping his sword. With a mocking chuckle, he didn't seem the least bit shaken. To him, It was as if a mere insect were crawling in his direction. Before it could complete its attack, William let out a shrill scream and suddenly fell, his chin hitting the ground. Julian's sharp sword had made a deep cut in its shoulder. Without showing any remorse, the protagonist watched his adversary writhing in pain. He noticed that William had acquired regenerative abilities. Normally, human traits are transferred to the demonic form, and it seemed the mage's strong desire to live had been amplified, transforming into healing power. As he watched the fight, Joshua asked how the protagonist would manage to kill that monster. Julian smiled. He was starting to realize that he was actually having a lot of fun with this battle. A human who was once able to use unique skills and spells had become a demon that could only use the power of regeneration. Placing a hand on his chin, the protagonist found the whole situation quite interesting. Thanks to his perception skill, Julian could see that no matter how good the enemy's healing ability was, all he had to do was attack its core. His trained eyes began to search for the vital point, and something in particular on the demon's head caught his attention. The protagonist deciphered it instantly. The core was there. It was as if William himself was begging to be killed, but the former mage didn't give up. Cracking his shoulders and warming up his body, he prepared himself as all his wounds healed. The enemy was alert to his opponent's every move. Then, Julian asked if they could continue the battle. With a roar, the demon seemed to agree. Excited, the protagonist told his enemy to come at him with everything he had. The moonlight sword shines with all its splendor. Without fearing his adversary, William, now transformed into a demon, charges toward him with all his might. As the monster approaches, the protagonist points his weapon and unleashes a swift horizontal strike, which hits the enemy's body dead on, destroying its left arm as if it were nothing. The blow was so strong and fast that it ended up splattering a bit on the protagonist's face, but he deemed all that effort useless. Still with energy to attack, the demon kept moving, forcing Julian to use the blade of his sword to defend himself. With an altered tone of voice, the young man questioned how his enemy dared to attack him. The demon hunter, suddenly, with a vertical movement of his blade, the swordsman changes the tide of the battle. As a result of the charge, the monster's other arm is also destroyed, once again splattering Julian's face. He gets into an attack stance once more, preparing a possible final blow and aiming for the demon's core, located in its head. As soon as he spots an opening, the boy lunges and jumps, stepping on the enemy's chest for support. Then, he pulls his arm back, preparing the attack with a wicked smile on his face, ready to end the fight. With a final sword strike, the protagonist pierces the demon's core, shattering it like a precious jewel. The monster's body falls backward, and Julian jumps off it. Its eyes no longer show any activity, and the regeneration ability doesn't activate. William's face can barely be seen, now pierced by the blade. Finally, the demon falls to the ground. The protagonist observes the body and cleans his hands. Finishing cleaning his clothes, he seems proud of his victory and pulls the sword that was stuck in his opponent's head, shouting at the top of his lungs that he is Julian, the demon hunter. Inside, however, Sihu is quite disappointed for having to act this way. Someone who watched the entire fight is gaping and speechless. It's Joshua, who can't stop his body from trembling. The victorious swordsman continues walking down the hall, his suit impeccable, and approaches the frightened Crifart, who is kneeling on the floor. As he places a hand on his chin, Julian notices that the boy is terrified. He certainly deserved to be punished for trespassing on a property at night, but this young man is very important to the Crifart family. Perhaps it would be a good idea to bring him over to his side. Julian crouches down and places a hand on the boy's shoulder, congratulating him in a sinister voice for managing to stay alive until now, as an intimidating aura emanates from him. A while later, our protagonist sat thinking about the demon horn replica. The young man never imagined he would see a replica in this place, after having found another in the slums. In the original story, these replicas only started to cause major problems after the Dawn Society expanded its influence in the Empire. Tapping the stone on the table, the boy reflected that things were happening far too quickly. Normally, this was only supposed to occur after Rinnet graduated from the academy. The reason was that the creator of these replicas had a very close relationship with the person she sought revenge against. As he began to think about it, Julian realized the individual behind the creation of these horns had to be the Black Knight. This knight hides from the Empire behind a black mask and secretly battles the Dawn Society with his overwhelming power. The person behind it all turns out to be the Holy Swordsman, Hayden Reich. If the Black Knight had already appeared, then the replicas shouldn't have surfaced so soon, or at least there would be rumors about it. This complete silence was unsettling the protagonist, Perhaps Pintel hadn't appeared yet. The Black Knight only gains his fame after he stops Pintel from taking the Soul Stones. As someone who intends to stop the demon god's resurrection and dissolve the Dawn Society, this knight could be considered to be on Julian's side, but the MC refused to believe that the Black Knight hadn't appeared yet and was just watching the potential danger unfold. He felt this way because of his complete trust in Hayden, not just because of the story. After all, the man was the main character. But in any case, the boy had to focus on the most important thing right now, setting a good example.